She sat, her spine aching in the back of the black Pontiac, and tried her best to get some sleep. But the hot, still air clung about her thin neck and gave her dreams of suffocation. So she gave up her attempts to rest and contented herself with watching the wheat fields pass and counting the grain elevators bright against the thunderheads that were beginning to gather in the northeast. In the front of the vehicle, Earl sang to himself as he drove. Beside her, John. No more than 2 feet away from her, but to all intents and purposes 1,000,000 miles distant. He studied the epistles of St. Paul, murmuring the words as he read. Then, as they drove through Pantek's village, "They build the warheads here," Earl had said cryptically, then said no more. The rain began. It came down suddenly, as evening was beginning to fall, lending darkness to darkness, almost instantly plunging the Amarillo-Pampa highway into watery night. Virginia rolled up her window. The rain, though refreshing, was soaking her plain blue dress, the only one John approved of her wearing at meetings. Now there was nothing to look at beyond the glass. She sat, the unease growing in her with every mile they covered to Pampa, listening to the vehemence of the downpour on the roof of the car and to her husband speaking in whispers at her side. He sat as ever upright, the same dog-eared, soft-backed Bible he'd been using for years open in his lap. He surely knew the passages he was reading by heart. He quoted them often enough, and with such a mixture of familiarity and freshness that the words might have been his, not Paul's, newly minted from his own mouth. That passion and vigor would in time make John Geyer America's greatest evangelist. Virginia had no doubt of that. During the grueling, hectic weeks of the tri-state tour, her husband had displayed unprecedented confidence and maturity. His message had lost none of its vehemence with this newfound professionalism. It was still that old-fashioned mixture of damnation and redemption that he always propounded. But now he had complete control of his gifts. In town after town in Oklahoma and New Mexico and now in Texas, the faithful had gathered to listen by the hundreds and thousands, eager to come again into God's kingdom. In Pampa, 30 miles from here, they would already be assembling, despite the rain, determined to have a grandstand view when their crusader arrived. They would have brought their children, their savings, and most of all, their hunger for forgiveness. But forgiveness was for tomorrow. First they had to get to Pampa, and the rain was worsening. Earl had given up his singing once the storm began, and was concentrating all his attention on the road ahead. Sometimes he would sigh to himself and stretch in his seat. Virginia tried not to concern herself with the way he was driving, but as the torrent became a deluge, her anxiety got the better of her. She leaned forward from the back seat and started to peer through the windshield, watching for vehicles coming in the opposite direction. Accidents were common in conditions like these, bad weather, and a tired driver eager to be 20 miles further down the road than he was. At her side, John sensed her concern. "The Lord is with us," he said, not looking up from the tightly printed pages, though it was by now far too dark for him to read. "It's a bad night, John," she said. "Maybe we shouldn't try to go all the way to Pampa. Earl must be tired." "I'm fine," Earl put in. "It's not that far." "You're tired," Virginia repeated. "We all are." "Well, we could find a motel, I guess," Geyer suggested. "What do you think, Earl?" Earl shrugged his sizable shoulders. "Whatever you say, boss," he replied, not putting up much of a fight. Geyer turned to his wife and gently patted the back of her hand. "We'll find a motel," he said. "Earl can call ahead to Pampa and tell them that we'll be with them in the morning. How's that?" She smiled at him, but he wasn't looking at her. "I think White Deer's next off the highway," Earl told Virginia. "Maybe they'll have a motel." In fact, the Cottonwood Motel lay a half-mile west of White Deer, in an area of waste ground south of US 60, a small establishment with a dead or dying cottonwood tree in the lot between its two low buildings. There were a number of cars already in the motel parking lot and lights burning in most of the rooms, fellow fugitives from the storm, presumably. Earl drove into the lot and parked as close to the manager's office as possible, then made a dash across the rain-lashed ground to find out if the place had any rooms for the night. With the engine stilled, the sound of the rain on the roof of the Pontiac was more oppressive than ever. "I hope there's space for us," Virginia said, watching the water on the window smear the neon sign. Geyer didn't reply. The rain thundered on overhead. "Talk to me, John," she said to him. "What for?" She shook her head. Never mind. Strands of hair clung to her slightly clammy forehead. Though the rain had come, the heat in the air had not lifted. "I hate the rain," she said. "It won't last all night," Geyer replied, running a hand through his thick gray hair. It was a gesture he used on the platform as punctuation, a pause between one momentous statement and the next. She knew his rhetoric, both physical and verbal, so well. Sometimes she thought she knew everything about him there was to know, that he had nothing left to tell her that she truly wanted to hear, but then the sentiment was probably mutual. They had long ago ceased to have a marriage recognizable as such. Tonight, as every night on this tour, they would lie in separate beds, and he would sleep that deep, easy sleep that came so readily to him, while she would surreptitiously swallow a pill or two to bring some welcome serenity. Sleep, he had often said, is a time to commune with the Lord. He believed in the efficacy of dreams, though he didn't talk of what he saw in them. The time would come when he would unveil the majesty of his visions. She had no doubt of that. But in the meantime, he slept alone and kept his counsel, leaving her to whatever secret sorrows she might have. It was easy to be bitter, but she fought the temptation. His destiny was manifest. It was demanded of him by the Lord. If he was fierce with her, he was fiercer still with himself, living by a regime that would have destroyed lesser men, and still chastising himself for his pettiest act of weakness. At last, Earl appeared from the office and crossed back to the car to run. He had 3 keys. "Rooms 7 and 8, he said breathlessly, the rain dripping off his brow and nose. "I got the key to the interconnecting door, too." "Good," said Geyer. "Last 2 in the place," he said. "I'll drive the car around. The rooms are in the other building." The interior of the 2 rooms was a hymn to banality. They'd stayed in what seemed like 1,000 cells like these, identical down to the sickly orange bed covers and the light-faded print of the Grand Canyon on the pale green walls. John was insensitive to his surroundings and always had been. But to Virginia's eyes, these rooms were an apt model for purgatory. Soulless limbos in which nothing of moment had ever happened, nor ever would. There was nothing to mark these rooms out as different from all the others, but there was something different in her tonight. It wasn't talk of tornadoes that had brought this strangeness on. She watched Earl toing and froing with the bags and felt oddly removed from herself, as though she were watching events through a veil denser than the warm rain falling outside the door. She was almost sleepwalking. When John quietly told her which bed would be hers for tonight, she lay down and tried to control her sense of dislocation by relaxing. It was easier said than done. Somebody had a television on in a nearby room, and the late-night movie was word for word clear through the paper-thin walls. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes. Earl, ever solicitous, was looking down at her. He looked as weary as she felt. His face, deeply tanned from standing in the sun at the open-air rallies, looked yellowish rather than its usual healthy brown. He was slightly overweight, too, though this bulk married well with the wide, stubborn features. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you," she said. "A little thirsty. I'll see if I can get something for you to drink. They probably have a Coke machine." She nodded, meeting his eyes. There was a subtext to this exchange which Geyer, who was sitting at the table making notes for tomorrow's speech, could not know. On and off throughout the tour, Earl had supplied Virginia with pills. Nothing exotic, just tranquilizers to soothe her increasingly jangled nerves. But they, like stimulants, makeup, and jewelry, were not looked kindly upon by a man of Geyer's principles. And when by chance her husband had discovered the drugs, there had been an ugly scene. Earl had taken the brunt of his employer's ire, for which Virginia was deeply grateful. And though he was under strict instructions never to repeat the crime, he was soon supplying her again. Their guilt was an almost pleasurable secret between them. She read complicity in his eyes even now, as he did in hers. "No Coca-Cola," Geyer said. "Well, I thought we could make an exception." "Exception?" Geyer said, his voice taking on a characteristic note of self-regard. Rhetoric was in the air, as Earl cursed his idiot tongue. "The Lord doesn't give us laws to live by so that we can make exceptions, Earl. You know better than that." At that moment, Earl didn't much care what the Lord did or said. His concern was for Virginia. She was strong, he knew, despite her deep South courtesy and the accompanying facade of frailty. Strong enough to bring them all through the minor crises of the tour when the Lord had failed to step in and help his agents in the field. But nobody's strength was limitless. and he sensed that she was close to collapse. She gave so much to her husband, of her love and admiration, of her energies and enthusiasm. More than once in the past few weeks, Earl had thought that perhaps she deserved better than the man in the pulpit. "Maybe you could just give me some ice water," she said, looking up at him with lines of fatigue beneath her gray blue eyes. She was not, by contemporary standards, beautiful. Her features were too flawlessly aristocratic. Exhaustion, though, lent them new glamour. "Ice water, coming right up," Earl said, forcing a jovial tone that he had little strength to sustain. He went to the door. "Why don't you call the office and have someone else bring it over?" Geyer suggested as Earl made to leave. "I want to go through next week's itinerary with you." "That's no problem," Earl said, "really. Besides, I should call Pampa, tell him we're delayed." And he was out the door and onto the walkway before he could be contradicted. He needed an excuse to have some time to himself. The atmosphere between Virginia and Geyer was deteriorating by the day, and it was not a pleasant spectacle. He stood for a long moment, watching the rain sheet down. The cottonwood tree in the middle of the lot hung its balding head in the fury of the deluge. He knew exactly how it felt. As he stood on the walkway, wondering how he would be able to keep his sanity in the last 8 weeks of the tour, 2 figures walked from the highway and crossed the lot. He didn't see them, though the path they took to room 7 led them directly across his line of vision. They walked through the drenching rain from the waste ground behind the manager's office, where, back in 1955, they had parked their red Buick. And though the rain fell in a steady torrent, it left them both untouched. The woman, whose hairstyle had been in and out of fashion twice since the 50s, and whose clothes had the same period look, slowed for a moment to stare at the man who was watching the cottonwood tree with such rapt attention. He had kind eyes, despite his frown. In her time she might have loved such a man, she thought, but then her time had long gone, hadn't it? Buck, her husband, turned back to her. "Are you coming, Sadie?" he wanted to know. And she followed him, onto the concrete walkway. It had been wooden the last time she was here, and through the open door of room 7. A chill ran down Earl's back. Too much staring at the rain, he thought. That and too much fruitless longing. He walked to the end of the patio, steeled himself for the dash across the lot to the office, and counting to 3, ran. Sadie Durning glanced over her shoulder to watch Earl go, then looked back at Buck. The years had not tempered the resentment she felt toward her husband, any more than they'd improved his shifty features or his too easy laugh. She had not much liked him on June 2nd, 1955, and she didn't much like him now, precisely 30 years on. Buck Durning had the soul of a philanderer, as her father had always warned her. That in itself was not so terrible. It was, perhaps, the masculine condition. But it had led to such grubby behavior that eventually she had tired of his endless deceptions. He, unknowing to the last, had taken her low spirits as a cue for a second honeymoon. This phenomenal hypocrisy had finally overridden any lingering thoughts of tolerance or forgiveness she might have entertained, and when, 3 decades ago tonight, they had checked into the Cottonwood Motel, she had come prepared for more than a night of love. She had let Buck shower, and when he emerged, she had leveled the Smith & Wesson .38 at him and blown a gaping hole in his chest. Then she'd run, throwing the gun away as she went, knowing the police were bound to catch her, and not much caring when they did. They had taken her to Carson County Jail in Panhandle, and after a few weeks, to trial. She never once tried to deny the murder. There had been enough deception in her 38 years of life as it was, and so when they found her defiant, they took her to Huntsville State Prison, chose a bright day on the following October, and summarily passed 2,250 volts through her body, stopping her unrepentant heart almost instantaneously. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. She had been brought up with such simple moral equations. She had not been unhappy to die by the same mathematics. But tonight, she and Buck had elected to retrace the journey they'd taken 30 years before to see if they could discover how and why their marriage had ended in murder. It was a chance offered to many dead lovers, though few, apparently, took it up. Perhaps the thought of experiencing again the cataclysm that had ended their lives was too distasteful. Sadie, however, couldn't help but wonder if it had all been predestined, if a tender word from Buck or a look of genuine affection in his murky eyes could have stayed her trigger finger and so saved both their lives. This one-night stand would give them an opportunity to test history. Invisible, inaudible, they would follow the same route as they had 3 decades ago. The next few hours would tell if that route had led inevitably to murder. Room 7 was occupied, and so was the room beside it. The interconnecting door was wide, and fluorescent lights burned in both. The occupancy was not a problem. Sadie had long become used to the ethereal state, to wandering unseen among the living. In such a condition she had attended her niece's wedding, and later on her father's funeral, standing beside the grave with the dead old man and gossiping about the mourners. But Buck, however, never an agile individual, was more prone to carelessness. She hoped he would be careful tonight. After all, he wanted to see the experiment through as much as she did. As they stood on the threshold and cast their eyes around the room in which their fatal farce had been played out, she wondered if the shot had hurt him very much. She must ask him tonight, she thought, should the opportunity arise. There had been a young woman with a plain but pleasant face in the manager's office when Earl had gone in to book the rooms. She had now disappeared to be replaced by a man of 60 or so, wearing half a week's growth of mottled beard and a sweat-stained shirt. He looked up from a nose-close perusal of yesterday's Pampa Daily News when Earl entered. "Yeah?" "Is it possible to get some ice water?" Earl inquired. The man threw a hoarse yell over his shoulder. "Laura May, you in there?" Through the doorway behind came the din of the late-night movie, shots, screams, the roar of an escaped beast, and then Laura May's response. "What you want, Pa?" "There's a man wants room service." Laura's May father yelled back, not without a trace of irony in his voice. "Will you get out here and serve him?" No reply came, just more screams. They'd set Earl's teeth on edge. The manager glanced up at him, one of his eyes clouded by a cataract. "You with the evangelist?" he said. "Yes, how did you know, Laura May recognized him, seen his picture in the paper. "That's so. Don't miss a trick, my baby." As if on cue, Laura May emerged from the room behind the office. When her brown eyes fell on Earl, she visibly brightened. "Oh," she said, a smile quickening her features. "What can I do for you, mister?" The line, coupled with her smile, seemed to signal more than polite interest in Earl, or was it just his wishful thinking? Except for a lady of the night he'd met once in Ponca City, Oklahoma, his sex life had been non-existent in the last 3 months. Taking a chance, he returned Laura May's smile. Though she was at least 35, her manner was curiously girlish. The look she was giving him, almost intimidatingly direct. Meeting her eyes, Earl began to think that his first estimation had not been far off. "Ice water," he said. "I wondered if you had any. Mrs. Geyer isn't feeling so well." Laura May nodded. "I'll get some," she said, dallying for a moment in the doorway before returning into the television room. The din of the movie had abated, a scene of calm perhaps, before the beast emerged again, and in the hush Earl could hear the rain beating down outside, turning the earth to mud. "Quite a gully washer tonight, eh?" the manager observed. "This keeps up, you'll be rained out tomorrow." "People come out in all kinds of weather," Earl said. "John Geyer's a big draw." The man pulled a face. "Wouldn't rule out a tornado," he said, clearly reveling in the role of doomsayer. "We're just about due for one." "Really?" "Year before last, wind took the roof off the school, just lifted it right off." Laura May reappeared in the doorway with the tray on which a jug and 4 glasses were placed. Ice clinked against the jug's sides. "What you say, Pa?" she asked. "Tornado." "Isn't hot enough," she announced with casual authority. Her father grunted his disagreement, but made no argument in return. Laura May crossed toward Earl with the tray, but when he made a move to take it from her, she said, "I'll take it myself. You lead on." He didn't object. It would give them a little while to exchange pleasantries as they walked into the Geyers' room. Perhaps the same thought was in her mind. Either that, or she wanted a closer view of the evangelist. They went together as far as the end of the office block walkway in silence. There they halted. Before them lay 20 yards of puddle-strewn earth between one building and the next. "Shall I carry the jug?" Earl volunteered. "You bring the glasses and the tray?" "Sure," she replied. Then with the same direct look she'd given him before, she said, "What's your name?" "Earl," he told her. "Earl Rayburn." "I'm Laura May Cade." "I'm most pleased to meet you, Laura May." "You know about this place, do you?" she said. "Papa told you, I suppose." "You mean the tornadoes?" he asked. "No," she replied. "I mean murder." Sadie stood at the bottom of the bed and looked at the woman lying on it. She had very little dress sense, Sadie thought. The clothes were drab, and her hair wasn't fixed in a flattering way. She murmured something in her semi-comatose state, and then, abruptly, she woke. Her eyes opened wide. There was some unshaped alarm in them, and pain, too. Sadie looked at her and sighed. "What's the problem?" Buck wanted to know. He'd put down the cases and was sitting in a chair opposite the fourth occupant of the room, a large man with lean, forceful features and a mane of steel-gray hair that would not have shamed an Old Testament prophet. "No problem," Sadie replied. "I don't want to share a room with these two," Buck said. "Well, this is the room where we stayed," Sadie replied. "Let's move next door," Buck suggested, nodding through the open door into room 8. "We'll have more privacy." "They can't see us," Sadie said. "But I can see them," Buck replied, "and it gives me the creeps. It's not going to matter if we're in a different room, for Christ's sake." Without waiting for agreement from Sadie, Buck picked up the cases and carried them through into Earl's room. "Are you coming or not?" he asked Sadie. She nodded. It was better to give way to him. If she started to argue now, they'd never get past the first hurdle. Conciliation was to be a keynote of the reunion, she reminded herself, and dutifully followed him into room 8. On the bed, Virginia thought about getting up and going into the bathroom where, out of sight, she could take 1 or 2 tranquilizers. But John's presence frightened her. Sometimes she felt he could see right into her, that all her private guilt was an open book to him. She was certain that if she got up now and rooted in her bag for the medication, he would ask her what she was doing. If he did that, she'd blurt the truth out for sure. She didn't have the strength to resist the heat of his accusing eyes. No, it would be better to lie here and wait for Earl to come back with the water. Then, when the 2 men were discussing the tour, she would slip away to take the forbidden pills. There was an evasive quality to the light in the room. It distressed her, and she wanted to close her lids against its tricks. Only moments before, the light had conjured a mirage at the end of the bed, a moth-winged flicker of substance that had almost congealed in the air before flitting away. Over by the window, John was again reading under his breath. At first, she caught only a few of the words. "And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth." She instantly recognized the passage. Its imagery was unmistakable. "And unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power." The verse was from the Revelation of St. John the Divine. She knew the words that followed by heart. He had declaimed them time after time at the meetings. "And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads." Geyer loved Revelations. He read it more often than the Gospels, whose stories he knew by heart, but whose words did not ignite him the way the incantatory rhythms of Revelations did. When he preached Revelations, he shared the apocalyptic vision and felt exalted by it. His voice would take on a different note. The poetry, instead of coming out of him, came through him. Helpless in its grip, he rose on a spiral of ever more awesome metaphor, from angels to dragons, and thence to Babylon, the mother of harlots, sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast. Virginia tried to shut the words out. Usually, to hear her husband speak the poems of Revelations was a joy, but not tonight. Tonight, the words seemed ripe to the point of corruption, and she sensed, perhaps for the first time, that he didn't really understand what he was saying, that the spirit of the words passed him by while he recited them. She made a small, unintentional noise of complaint. Geyer stopped reading. "What is it?" he said. She opened her eyes, embarrassed to have interrupted him. "Nothing," she said. "Does my reading disturb you?" he wanted to know. The inquiry was a challenge, and she backed down from it. "No," she said. "No, of course not." In the doorway between the 2 rooms, Sadie watched Virginia's face. The woman was lying, of course. The words did disturb her. They disturbed Sadie, too, but only because they seemed so pitifully melodramatic. A drug, a dream of Armageddon, more comical than intimidating. "Tell him," she advised Virginia. "Go on. Tell him you don't like it." "Who are you talking to?" Buck said. "They can't hear you." Sadie ignored her husband's remarks. "Go on," she said to Virginia. "Tell the bastard." But Virginia just lay there while Geyer took up the passage again, its absurdities escalating. "And the shapes of the locusts were unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions." Sadie shook her head. Comic book terrors, fit to scare children with. Why did people have to die or grow out of that kind of nonsense? "Tell him," she said again. "Tell him how ridiculous he sounds." Even as the words left her lips, Virginia sat up on the bed and said, "John?" Sadie stared at her, willing her on. "Say it. Say it." "You have to talk about death all the time. It's very depressing." Sadie almost applauded. It wasn't quite the way she would have said it, but each to their own. "What did you say?" Geyer asked her, assuming he'd heard incorrectly. Surely she wasn't challenging him. Virginia put a trembling hand up to her lips, as if to cancel the words before they came again, but they came nevertheless. "Those passages you read, I hate them. They're so stupid," Sadie prompted. "Unpleasant," Virginia said. "Are you coming to bed or not?" Buck wanted to know. "In a moment," Sadie replied over her shoulder. "I just want to see what happens in here." "Life isn't a soap opera," Buck chimed in. Sadie was about to beg to differ, but before she had a chance, the evangelist had approached Virginia's bed, Bible in hand. "This is the inspired word of the Lord, Virginia," he said. "I know, John, but there are other passages. I thought you liked the apocalypse." "No," she said, "it distresses me." "You're tired," he replied. "Oh, yes," Sadie interjected. "That's what they always tell you when you get too close to the truth. You're tired, they say. Why don't you take a little nap?" "Why don't you sleep for a while?" Geyer said. "I'll go next door and work." Virginia met her husband's condescending look for fully 5 seconds, then nodded. "Yes," she conceded, "I am tired." "Foolish woman," Sadie told her. "Fight back or he'll do the same again. Give them an inch and they take half the damn state." Buck appeared behind Sadie. "I've asked you once," he said, taking her arm. "We're here to make friends, so let's get to it." He pulled her away from the door, rather more roughly than was necessary. She shrugged off his hand. "There's no need for violence, Buck," she said. "Ha! That's rich, coming from you," Buck said with a humorless laugh. "You want to see violence?" Sadie turned away from Virginia to look at her husband. "This is violence," he said. He had taken off his jacket now. He pulled his unbuttoned shirt open to reveal the shot wound. At such close quarters, Sadie's .38 had made a sizable hole in Buck's chest, scorched and bloody. It was as fresh as the moment he died. He put his finger to it, as if indicating the Sacred Heart. "You see that, sweetheart mine? You made that." She peered at the hole with no little interest. It certainly was a permanent mark, about the only one she'd ever made on the man, she suspected. "You cheated from the beginning, didn't you?" she said. "We're not talking about cheating, we're talking about shooting," Buck returned. "Seems to me one subject leads to another," Sadie replied, and back again. Buck narrowed his already narrow eyes at her. Dozens of women had found that look irresistible, to judge by the numbers of anonymous mourners at his funeral. "All right," he said, "I had women. So what?" "So I shot you for it," Sadie replied flatly. That was about all she had to say on the subject. It had made for a short trial. "Well, at least tell me you're sorry," Buck burst out. Sadie considered the proposition for a few moments and said, "But I'm not." She realized the response lacked tact, but it was the unavoidable truth. Even as they'd strapped her into the electric chair, with the priest doing his best to console her lawyer, she hadn't regretted the way things had turned out. "This whole thing's useless," Buck said. "We came here to make peace, and you can't even say you're sorry. You're a sick woman, you know that? You always were. You pried into my business, you snooped around behind my back." "I did not snoop," Sadie replied firmly. "Your dirt came and found me." "Dirt?" "Oh, yes, Buck, dirt. It always was with you, furtive and sweaty." He grabbed hold of her. "Take that back," he demanded. "You used to frighten me once," she replied coolly, "but then I bought a gun." He thrust her away from him. "All right," he said, "don't say I didn't try. I wanted to see if we could forgive and forget. I really did. But you're not willing to give an inch, are you?" He fingered his wound as he spoke, his voice softening. "We could have had a good time here tonight, babe," he murmured. "Just you and me, and I could have given you a bit of the old jazz, you know what I mean? Time was, you wouldn't have said no." She sighed softly. What he said was true. Time was. She would have taken what little he gave her and counted herself a blessed woman. But times had changed. "Come on, babe, loosen up," he said smokily, and began to unbutton his shirt completely, pulling it out of his trousers. His belly was bald as a baby's. "What say we forget what you said and lie down and talk?" She was about to reply to his suggestion when the door of room 7 opened, and in came the man with the soulful eyes, accompanied by a woman whose face rang a bell in Sadie's memory. Ice water, Earl said. Sadie watched him move across the room. There'd not been a man as fine as that in Wichita Falls, not that she could remember anyway. He almost made her want to live again. Are you going to get undressed? Buck asked from the room behind her. In a minute, Buck. We've got all night, for Christ's sake. I'm Laura May Cade, the woman with the familiar face said as she set the ice water down on the table. Of course, thought Sadie. You're little Laura May. The girl had been 5 or 6 when Sadie was last here, an odd, secretive child, full of sly looks. The intervening years had matured her physically, but the strangeness was still in evidence in her slightly off-center features. Sadie turned to Buck, who was sitting on the bed untying his shoes. Remember the little girl, she said, the one you gave a quarter to just to make her go away? What about her? She's here. That's so, he replied, clearly uninterested. Laura May had poured the water and was now taking the glass across to Virginia. It's real nice having you folks here, she said. We don't get much happening here, just the occasional tornado. Geyer nodded to Earl, who produced a $5 bill and gave it to Laura May. She thanked him, saying it wasn't necessary, then took the bill. She wasn't to be bribed into leaving, however. This kind of weather makes people feel real peculiar, she went on. Earl could predict what subject was hovering behind Laura May's lips. He'd already heard the bones of the story on the way across, and knew Virginia was in no mood to hear such a tale. Thank you for the water, he said, putting a hand on Laura May's arm to usher her through the door, but Geyer cut in. My wife's been suffocating from heat exhaustion, he said. You should be careful, ma'am, Laura May advised Virginia. People do some mighty weird things. Like what? Virginia asked. I don't think we, Earl began, but before he could say, want to hear, Laura May casually replied. Oh, murder mostly. Virginia looked up from the glass of ice water in which her focus had been immersed. Murder, she said. Hear that? Said Sadie proudly. She remembers. In this very room, Laura May managed to blurt before Earl forcibly escorted her out. Wait, Virginia said, as the two figures disappeared through the door. Earl, I want to hear what happened. No, you don't, Geyer told her. Oh, yes, she does, said Sadie very quietly, studying the look on Virginia's face. You'd really like to know, wouldn't you, Ginny? For a moment, pregnant with possibilities, Virginia looked away from the outside door and stared straight through into room 8, her eyes seeming to rest on Sadie. The look was so direct it could have almost been one of recognition. The ice in her glass tinkled. She frowned. What's wrong? Geyer asked her. Virginia shook her head. I asked you what was wrong, Geyer insisted. Virginia put down her glass on the bedside table. After a moment she said very simply, There's somebody here, John. What do you mean? There's somebody in the room with us. I heard voices before. Raised voices. Next door, Geyer said. No, from Earl's room. It's empty. It must have been next door. Virginia was not to be silenced with logic. I heard voices, I tell you, and I saw something at the end of the bed, something in the air. Oh, my Jesus, said Sadie under her breath. The goddamn woman's psychic. Buck stood up. He was naked now, but for his shorts. He wandered over to the interconnecting door to look at Virginia with new appreciation. Are you sure? He said. Hush, Sadie told him, moving out of Virginia's line of vision. She said she could see us. You're not well, Virginia, Geyer was saying in the next room. It's those pills he fed you. No, Virginia replied, her voice rising. When will you stop talking about the pills? They were just to calm me down, help me sleep. She certainly wasn't calm now, thought Buck. He liked the way she trembled as she tried to hold back her tears. She looked in need of some of the old jazz, did poor Virginia. Now that would help her sleep. I tell you, I can see things, she was telling her husband. That I can't? Geyer replied incredulously. Is that what you're saying? That you can see visions the rest of us are blind to? I'm not proud of it, damn you, she yelled at him, incensed by this inversion. Come away, Buck, Sadie said. We're upsetting her. She knows we're here. So what? Buck responded. Her prick of a husband doesn't believe her. Look at him. He thinks she's crazy. Well, we'll make her crazy if we parade around, said Sadie. At least let's keep our voices down, huh? Buck looked around at Sadie and offered up a dirty rag of a smile. Want to make it worth my while? He said sleazily. I'll keep out of the way if you and me can have some fun. Sadie hesitated a moment before replying. It was probably perverse to reject Buck's advances. The man was an emotional infant and always had been. Sex was one of the few ways he could express himself. All right, Buck, she said, just let me freshen up and fix my hair. An uneasy truce had apparently been declared in room 7. "I'm going to take a shower, Virginia," Geyer said. "I suggest you lie down and stop making a fool of yourself. You go talking like that in front of people, and you'll jeopardize the crusade. You hear me?" Virginia looked at her husband with clearer sight than she'd ever enjoyed before. "Oh, yes," she said, without a trace of feeling in her voice. "I hear you." He seemed satisfied. He slipped off his jacket and went into the bathroom, taking his Bible with him. She heard the door lock, and then exhaled a long, queasy sigh. There would be recriminations aplenty for the exchange they'd just had. He would squeeze every last drop of contrition from her in the days to come. She glanced around at the interconnecting door. There was no longer any sign of those shadows in the air, not the least whisper of lost voices. Perhaps, just perhaps, she'd imagined it. She opened her bag and rummaged for the bottle of pills hidden there. One eye on the bathroom door, she selected a cocktail of 3 varieties and downed them with a gulp of ice water. In fact, the ice in the jug had long since melted. The water she drank down was tepid, like the rain that fell relentlessly outside. By morning, perhaps the whole world would have been washed away. If it had, she mused, she wouldn't grieve. "I asked you not to mention the killing," Earl told Laura May. "Mrs. Geyer can't take that kind of talk." "People getting killed all the time," Laura May replied, unfazed. "Can't go around with her head in a bucket." Earl said nothing. They had just gotten to the end of the walkway. The return sprint across the lot to the other building was ahead. Laura May turned to face him. She was several inches the shorter of the two. Her eyes, turned up to his, were large and luminous. Angry as he was, he couldn't help but notice how full her mouth was, how her lips glistened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to get you into trouble." "Sure, I know. I'm just edgy." "It's the heat," she returned. "Like I said, puts thoughts into people's heads, you know." Her look wavered for a moment. A hint of uncertainty crossed her face. Earl could feel the back of his neck tingle. This was his cue, wasn't it? She'd offered it unequivocally, but the words failed him. Finally, it was she who said, "Do you have to go back there right now?" He swallowed. His throat was dry. "Don't see why," he said. "I mean, I don't want to get between them when they're having words with each other." "Bad blood?" she asked. "I think so. I'm best leaving them to sort it out in peace. They don't want me." Laura May looked down from Earl's face. "I do," she breathed, the words scarcely audible above the thump of the rain. He put a cautious hand to her face and touched the down of her cheek. She trembled, ever so slightly. Then he bent his head to kiss her. She let him brush her lips with his. "Why don't we go to my room?" she said against his mouth. "I don't like it out here." "What about your papa?" "He'd be dead drunk by now. It's the same routine every night. Just take it quietly. You'll never know." Earl wasn't very happy with the game plan. It was more than his job was worth to be found in bed with Laura May. He was a married man. Even if he hadn't seen Barbara in 3 months, Laura May sensed his trepidation. "Don't come if you don't want to," she said. "It's not that," he replied. As he looked down at her, she licked her lips. It was a complete unconscious motion, he felt sure, but it was enough to decide him. In a sense, though he couldn't know it at the time, all that lay ahead, the farce, the bloodletting, the inevitable tragedy, pivoted on Laura May, wetting her lower lip with such casual sensuality. "Oh, shit," he said. "You're too much. You know that." He bent to her and kissed her again, while somewhere over toward Skellytown, the clouds gave out a loud roll of thunder, like a circus drummer before some particularly elaborate acrobatics. In room 7, Virginia was having bad dreams. The pills had not secured her a safe harbor in sleep. Instead, she'd been pitched into a howling tempest. In her dreams, she was clinging to a crippled tree, a pitiful anchor in such a maelstrom, while the wind threw cattle and automobiles into the air, sucking half the world up into the pitch-black clouds that boiled over her head. Just as she thought she must die here, utterly alone, she saw 2 figures a few yards from her, appearing and disappearing in the blinding veils of dust the wind was stirring up. She couldn't see their faces, so she called to them. "Who are you?" Next door, Sadie heard Virginia talking in her sleep. What was the woman dreaming about, she wondered. She fought the temptation to go next door and whisper into the dreamer's ear, however. Behind Virginia's eyelids, the dream raged on. Though she called to the strangers in the storm, they seemed not to hear her. Rather than be left alone, she forsook the comfort of the tree, which was instantly uprooted and whirled away, and battled through the biting dust to where the strangers stood. As she approached, a sudden lull in the wind revealed them to her. One was male, the other female. Both were armed. As she called to them to make herself known, they attacked each other, opening fatal wounds in neck and torso. "Murder!" she shouted, as the wind splattered her face with the antagonist's blood. "For God's sake, somebody stop them! Murder!" And suddenly she was awake, her heart beating fit to burst. The dream still flitted behind her eyes. She shook her head to rid herself of the horrid images, then moved groggily to the edge of the bed and stood up. Her head felt so light it might float off like a balloon. She needed some fresh air. Seldom in her life had she felt so strange. It was as though she was losing her slender grip on what was real, as though the solid world were slipping through her fingers. She crossed to the outside door. In the bathroom, she could hear John speaking aloud, addressing the mirror, no doubt, to refine every detail of his delivery. She stepped out onto the walkway. There was some refreshment to be had out here, but precious little. In one of the rooms at the end of the block, a child was crying. As she listened, a sharp voice silenced it. For maybe 10 seconds, the voice was hushed. Then it began again in a higher key. "Go on," she told the child. "You cry. There's plenty of reason." She trusted unhappiness in people. More and more it was all she trusted. Sadness was so much more honest than all the artificial bonhomie that was all the style these days, that facade of empty-headed optimism that was plastered over the despair that everyone felt in their heart of hearts. The child was expressing that wise panic now as it cried in the night. She silently applauded its honesty. In the bathroom, John Geyer tired of the sight of his own face in the mirror and gave some time over to thought. He put down the toilet lid and sat in silence for several minutes. He could smell his own stale sweat. He needed a shower and then a good night's sleep. Tomorrow, Pampa. Meetings, speeches, thousands of hands to be shaken and blessings to be bestowed. Sometimes he felt so tired, and then he'd get to wondering if the Lord couldn't lighten his burden a little. But that was the devil talking in his ear, wasn't it? He knew better than to pay that scurrilous voice much attention. If you listened once, the doubts would get a hold, the way they had of Virginia. Somewhere along the road, while his back had been turned about the Lord's business, she'd lost her way, and the old one had found her wandering. He, John Geyer, would have to bring her back to the path of the righteous, make her see the danger her soul was in. There would be tears and complaints. Maybe she would be bruised a little, but bruises healed. He put down his Bible and went down on his knees in the narrow space between the bath and the towel rack and began to pray. He tried to find some benign words, a gentle prayer to ask for the strength to finish his task, and to bring Virginia back to her senses. But mildness had deserted him. It was the vocabulary of revelations that came back to his lips, unbidden. He let the words spill out, though the fever in him burned brighter with every syllable he spoke. "What do you think?" Laura May had asked Earl as she escorted him into her bedroom. Earl was too startled by what was in front of him to offer any coherent reply. The bedroom was a mausoleum, founded, it seemed, in the name of trivia. Laid out on the shelves, hung on the walls, and covering much of the floor were items that might have been picked out of any garbage can. Empty Coke cans, collections of ticket stubs, coverless and defaced magazines, vandalized toys, shattered mirrors, postcards never sent, letters never read. A limping parade of the forgotten and the forsaken. His eye passed back and forth over the elaborate display and found not one item of worth among the junk and bric-a-brac. Yet, all this inconsequentia had been arranged with meticulous care so that no one piece masked another. And now that he looked more closely, he saw that every item was numbered, as if each had a place in some system of junk. The thought that this was all Laura May's doing shrank Earl's stomach. The woman was clearly verging on lunacy. "This is my collection," she told him. "So I see," he replied. "I've been collecting it since I was 6. She crossed the room to the dressing table, where most women Earl had known would have arranged their toiletries. But here were arrayed more of the same inane exhibits. "Everybody leaves something behind, you know," Laura May said to Earl, picking up some piece of dreck with all the care others might bestow on a precious stone, and examining it before placing it back in its elected position. "Is that so?" Earl said. "Oh, yeah, everyone. even if it's only a dead match or a tissue with lipstick on it. We used to have a Mexican girl, Ophelia, who cleaned the rooms when I was a kid. It started as a game with her, really. She'd always bring me something belonging to the guests who'd left. When she died, I took over collecting stuff for myself, always keeping something as a memento. Earl began to grasp the absurd poetry of the museum. In Laura May's neat body was all the ambition of a great curator. Not for her mere art. She was collecting keepsakes of a more intimate nature, forgotten signs of people who'd passed this way and who, most likely, she would never see again. "You've got it all marked," he observed. "Oh, yes," she replied. "Wouldn't be much use if I didn't know who it all belonged to, would it?" Earl supposed not. "Incredible," he murmured, quite genuinely. She smiled at him. He suspected she didn't show her collection to many people. He felt oddly honored to be viewing it. "I got some really prized things," she said, opening the middle drawer of the dressing table. "Stuff I don't put on display." "Oh?" he said. The drawer she'd opened was lined with tissue paper, which rustled as she brought forth a selection of special acquisitions. A soiled tissue found beneath the bed of a Hollywood star who had tragically died 6 weeks after staying at the motel. A heroin needle carelessly left by X. An empty book of matches, which she had traced to a homosexual bar in Amarillo, discarded by Y. The names she mentioned meant little or nothing to Earl, but he played the game as he felt she wanted it played, mingling exclamations of disbelief with genuine laughter. Her pleasure, fed by his, grew. She took him through all the exhibits in the dressing table drawer, offering some anecdote or biographical insight with every one. When she had finished, she said, "I wasn't quite telling you the truth before when I said it began as a game with Ophelia. That really came later." "So what started you off?" he asked. She went down on her haunches and unlocked the bottom drawer of the dressing table with a key on a chain around her neck. There was only one artifact in this drawer. This she lifted out most reverentially and stood up to show him. "What's this?" "You asked me what started the collection," she said. "This is it. I found it and I never gave it back. You can look if you want." She extended the prize toward him, and he unfolded the pressed white cloth the object had been wrapped up in. It was a gun, a Smith & Wesson .38, in pristine condition. It took him only a moment to realize which motel guest this piece of history had once belonged to. "The gun that Sadie Durning used," he said, picking it up. "Am I right?" She beamed. "I found it in the scrub behind the motel before the police got to searching for it. There was such a commotion, you know. Nobody looked twice at me, and of course they didn't try and look for it in the light." "Why was that?" 55 tornado hit just the day after. Took the motel roof right off and blew the school away. People were killed that year. We had funerals for weeks." "They didn't question you at all?" "No, I was a good liar," she replied, with no small satisfaction. "And you never owned up to having it all these years?" She looked faintly contemptuous of the suggestion. "They might have taken it off me," she said. "But it's evidence." "They executed her anyway, didn't they?" she replied. "Sadie admitted to it right from the beginning. It wouldn't have made any difference if they'd found the murder weapon or not." Earl turned the gun over in his hand. There was encrusted dirt on it. "That's blood," Laura May informed him. "It was still wet when I found it. She must have touched Buck's body to make sure he was dead. Only used 2 bullets. The rest are still in there." Earl had never much liked weapons since his brother-in-law had blown off 3 of his toes in an accident. The thought that the .38 was still loaded made him yet more apprehensive. He put it back in its wrapping and folded the cloth over it. "I've never seen anything like this place," he said, as Laura May kneeled to return the gun to the drawer. "You're quite a woman, you know that?" She looked up at him. Her hand slowly slid up the front of his trousers. "I'm glad you like what you see," she said. "Sadie, are you coming to bed or not?" I just want to finish fixing my hair. You're not playing fair. Forget your hair and come over here. In a minute. Shit. You're in no hurry, are you, Buck? I mean, you're not going anywhere. She caught his reflection in the mirror. He gave her a sour glance. You think it's funny, don't you? He said. Think what's funny? What happened? Me getting shot? You getting the chair? It gives you some perverse satisfaction. She thought about this for a few moments. It was the first time Buck had shown any real desire to talk seriously. She wanted to answer with the truth. Yes, she said, when she was certain that was the answer. Yes, I suppose it did please me in an odd sort of way. I knew it, said Buck. Keep your voice down, Sadie snapped. She'll hear us. She's gone outside. I heard her, and don't change the subject. He rolled over and sat on the edge of the bed. The wound did look painful, Sadie thought. Did it hurt much? She asked, turning to him. Are you kidding? He said, displaying the hole for her. What does it fucking look like? I thought it would be quick. I never wanted you to suffer. Is that right? Buck said. Of course, I loved you once, Buck. I really did. You know what the headline was the day after? No, Buck replied. I was otherwise engaged, remember? Motel becomes slaughterhouse of love, it said. There were pictures of the room, of the blood on the floor, and you being carried out under a sheet. My finest hour, he said bitterly, and I don't even get my face in the press. I'll never forget the phrase slaughterhouse of love. I thought it was romantic, don't you? Buck grunted in disgust. Sadie went on anyway. I got 300 proposals of marriage while I was waiting for the chair. Did I ever tell you that? Oh, yeah, Buck said. Did they come and visit you? Give you a bit of the old jazz? Keep your mind off the big day? No, said Sadie frostily. You could have had a time of it. I would have. I'm sure you would, she replied. Just thinking about it gets me cooking, Sadie. Why don't you come back and get it while it's hot? We came here to talk, Buck. We talked, for Christ's sake, he said. I don't want to talk no more. Now come here, you promised. He rubbed his abdomen and gave her a crooked smile. Sorry about all the blood and all, but I ain't responsible for that. Sadie stood up. Now you're being sensible, he said. As Sadie Durning crossed to the bed, Virginia came in out of the rain. It had cooled her face somewhat, and the tranquilizers she'd taken were finally beginning to soothe her system. In the bathroom, John was still praying, his voice rising and falling. She crossed to the table and glanced at his notes, but the tightly packed words wouldn't come into focus. She picked up the papers to peer more closely at them. And as she did so, she heard a groan from the next room. She froze. The groan came again, louder. The papers trembled in her hands. She made to put them back on the table, but the voice came a third time, and this time the papers slipped from her hand. Give a little, damn you, the voice said. The words, though blurred, were unmistakable. More grunts followed. Virginia moved toward the door between the rooms, the trembling spreading up from her hands to the rest of her body. Play the game, will ya? The voice came again. There was anger in it. Cautiously, Virginia looked through into room 8, holding on to the door lintel for support. There was a shadow on the bed. It writhed distressingly, as if attempting to devour itself. She stood, rooted to the spot, trying to stifle a cry while more sounds rose from the window. Not one voice this time, but two. The words were jumbled. In her growing panic, she could make little sense of them. She couldn't turn her back on the scene, however. She stared on, trying to make some sense of the shifting configuration. Now a smattering of words came clear, and with them a recognition of the event on the bed. She heard a woman's voice protesting. Now she even began to see the speaker, struggling beneath a partner who was attempting to arrest her flailing arms. Her first instinct about the scene had been correct. It was a devouring of a kind. Sadie looked up into Buck's face. That bastard grin of his had returned. It made her trigger finger itch. This is what he'd come for tonight. Not for conversation about failed dreams, but to humiliate her the way he had so often in the past, whispering obscenities into her neck while he pinned her to the sheets. The pleasure he took in her discomfort made her seethe. Let go of me, she shouted, louder than she'd intended. At the door, Virginia said, Let her alone. We got an audience, Buck Durning grinned, pleased by the appalled look on Virginia's face. Sadie took advantage of his diverted attention. She slipped her arm from his grasp and pushed him off her. He rolled off the narrow bed with a yell. As she stood up, she looked around at the ashen woman in the doorway. How much could Virginia see or hear? Enough to know who they were? Buck was climbing over the bed toward his sometime murderer. Come on, he said. It's only the crazy lady. Keep away from me, Sadie warned. You can't harm me now, woman. I'm already dead, remember? His exertions had opened the gunshot wound. There was blood smeared all over him. Over her, too. She backed toward the door. There was nothing to be salvaged here. What little chance of reconciliation there had been had degenerated into a bloody farce. The only solution to the whole sorry mess was to get out and leave poor Virginia to make what sense of it she could. The longer she stayed to fight with Buck, the worse the situation would become for all three of them. "Where are you going?" Buck demanded. "Out," she responded. "Away from you. I said I loved you, Buck, didn't I? Well, maybe I did, but I'm cured now." "Bitch." "Goodbye, Buck. Have a nice eternity." "Worthless bitch." She didn't reply to his insults. She simply walked through the door and out into the night. Virginia watched the shadow pass through the closed door and held on to the tattered remains of her sanity with white-knuckled fists. She had to put these apparitions out of her head as quickly as possible, or she knew she'd go crazy. She turned her back on room 8. What she needed now was pills. She picked up her handbag, only to drop it again as her shaking fingers rooted for bottles, depositing the contents of the bag onto the floor. One of the bottles, which she had failed to seal properly, spilled. A rainbow assortment of tablets rolled across the stained carpet in every direction. She bent to pick them up. Tears had started to come, blinding her. She felt for the pills as best she could, beating half a handful into her mouth and trying to swallow them dry. The tattoo of the rain on the roof sounded louder and louder in her head. A roll of thunder gave weight to the percussion. And then John's voice. "What are you doing, Virginia?" She looked up, tears in her eyes, a pill-laden hand hovering at her lips. She'd forgotten her husband entirely. The shadows and the rain and the voices had driven all thoughts of him from her head. She let the pills drop back to the carpet. Her limbs were shaking. She didn't have the strength to stand up. I heard the voices again," she said. His eyes had come to rest on the spilled contents of the bag and bottle. Her crime was spread for him to see quite plainly. It was useless to try and deny anything. It would only enrage him further. "Woman," he said, "haven't you learned your lesson?" She didn't reply. Thunder drowned his next words. He repeated them, more loudly. "Where did you get the pills, Virginia?" She shook her head weakly. "Earl again, I suppose. Who else?" "No," she murmured. "Don't lie to me, Virginia." He had raised his voice to compete with the storm. "You know the Lord hears your lies as I hear them, and you are judged, Virginia. Judged!" "Please leave me be," she pleaded. "You're poisoning yourself." "I need them, John," she told him. "I really do." She had no energy to hold his bullying at bay, nor did she want him to take the pills from her. But then, what was the use of protesting? He would have his way, as always. It would be wiser to give up the booty now and save herself unnecessary anguish. "Look at yourself," he said, groveling on the floor. "Don't start on me, John," she replied. "You win. Take the pills. Go on. Take them." He was clearly disappointed by her rapid capitulation, like an actor preparing for a favorite scene, only to find the curtain rung down prematurely. But he made the most of her invitation, upending her handbag on the bed and collecting the bottles. "Is this all?" he demanded. "Yes," she said. "I won't be deceived, Virginia." "That's all," she shouted back at him, then more softly. "I swear that's all." "Earl will be sorry. I promise you that. He's exploited your weakness." "No!" "Your weakness and your fear. The man is in Satan's employ. That much is apparent." "Don't talk nonsense," she said, surprising herself with her own vehemence. "I asked him to supply them." She got to her feet with some difficulty. "He didn't want to defy you, John. It was me, all along." Geyer shook his head. "No, Virginia, you won't save him, not this time. He's worked to subvert me all along. I see that now. Worked to harm my crusade through you. Well, I'm wise to him now. Oh, yes. Oh, yes." He suddenly turned and pitched the handful of bottles through the open door and into the rainy darkness outside. Virginia watched them fly and felt her heart sink. There was precious little sanity to be had on a night like this. It was a night for going crazy, wasn't it? With the rain bruising your skull and murder in the air. And now the damn fool had thrown away her last chance of equilibrium. He turned back to her, his perfect teeth bared. "How many times do you have to be told?" He was not to be denied his scene after all, it seemed. "I'm not listening," she told him, clamping her hands over her ears. Even so, she could hear the rain. "I won't listen." "I'm patient, Virginia," he said. "The Lord will have his judgment in the fullness of time. Now, where's Earl?" She shook her head. Thunder came again. She wasn't sure if it was inside or out. "Where is he?" he boomed at her. "Gone for more of the same filth?" "No," she yelled back. "I don't know where he's gone." "You pray, woman," Geyer said. "You get down on your knees and thank the Lord I'm here to keep you from Satan." Content that his words made a striking exit line, he headed out in search of Earl, leaving Virginia shaking but curiously elated. He would be back, of course. There would be more recriminations, and from her the obligatory tears. As to Earl, he would have to defend himself as best he could. She slumped down on the bed, and her bleary eyes came to rest on the tablets that were all scattered across the floor. All was not quite lost. There were no more than 2 dozen, so she would have to be sparing in her use of them, but they were better than nothing at all. Wiping her eyes with the back of her hands, she kneeled down again to gather the pills up. As she did so, she realized that someone had their eyes on her. Not the evangelist. Back so soon? She looked up. The door out to the rain was still wide open, but he wasn't standing there. Her heart seemed to lose its rhythm for a moment as she remembered the shadows in the room next door. There had been 2. One had departed, but the other... Her eyes slid across to the interconnecting door. It was there, a greasy smudge that had taken on a new solidity since last she'd set eyes on it. Was it that the apparition was gaining coherence, or that she was seeing it in more detail? It was quite clearly human, and just as apparently male. It was staring at her. She had no doubt of that. She could even see its eyes when she concentrated. Her tenuous grasp of its existence was improving. It was gaining fresh resolution with every trembling breath she took. She stood up, very slowly. It took a step through the interconnecting door. She moved toward the outside door, and it matched her move with one of its own, sliding with eerie speed between her and the night. Her outstretched arm brushed against its smoky form, and as if illuminated by a lightning flash, an entire portrait of her accoster sprang into view in front of her, only to disappear as she withdrew her hand. She had glimpsed enough to appall her, however. The vision was that of a dead man. His chest had been blown open. Was this more of her dream spilling into the living world? She thought of calling after John to summon him back, but that meant approaching the door again and risking contact with the apparition. Instead, she took a cautious step backward, reciting a prayer beneath her breath as she did so. Perhaps John had been correct all along. Perhaps she had invited this lunacy into herself with the very tablets she was now treading to powder underfoot. The apparition closed in on her. Was it her imagination, or had it opened its arms as if to embrace her? Her heel caught on the skirt of the coverlet. Before she could stop herself, she was toppling backward. Her arms flailed, seeking support. Again she made contact with the dream thing. Again the whole picture appeared in front of her, but this time it didn't disappear, because the apparition had snatched at her hand and was grasping it tight. Her fingers felt as though they'd been plunged into ice water. She yelled for it to let her be, flinging up her free arm to push her assailant away, but it simply grasped her other hand, too. Unable to resist, she met its gaze. They were not the devil's eyes that looked at her. They were slightly stupid, even comical eyes, and below them, a weak mouth, which only reinforced her impression of witlessness. Suddenly she was not afraid. This was no demon. It was a delusion, brought on by exhaustion and pills. It could do her no harm. The only danger here was that she hurt herself in her attempts to keep the hallucinations at bay. Buck sensed that Virginia was losing the will to resist. "That's better," he coaxed her. "You just want a bit of the old jazz, don't you, Ginny?" He wasn't certain if she heard him, but no matter. He could readily make his intentions apparent. Dropping one of her hands, he ran his palm across her breasts. She sighed, a bewildered expression in her beautiful eyes, but made no effort to resist his attentions. "You don't exist," she told him plainly. "You're only in my mind, like John said. The pills made you. The pills did it all." Buck let the woman babble, let her think whatever she pleased, as long as it made her compliant. "That's right, isn't it?" she said. "You're not real, are you?" He obliged her with a polite reply. "Certainly," he said, squeezing her. "I'm just a dream, that's all." The answer seemed to satisfy her. "No need to fight me, is there?" he said. "I'll have come and gone before you know it." The manager's office lay empty. From the room beyond it, Geyer heard a television. It stood to reason that Earl must be somewhere in the vicinity. He had left their room with the girl who'd brought the ice water, and they certainly wouldn't be taking a walk together in weather like this. The thunder had moved in closer in the last few minutes. Now it was almost overhead. Geyer enjoyed the noise and the spectacle of the lightning. It fueled his sense of occasion. "Earl!" he yelled, making his way through the office and into the room with the television. The late movie was nearing a climax. The sound turned up deafeningly loud. A fantastical beast of some kind was treading Tokyo to rubble. Citizens fled, screaming. Asleep in a chair in front of this papier-mâché apocalypse was a late middle-aged man. Neither the thunder nor Geyer's calls had stirred him. A tumbler of spirits, nursed in his lap, had slipped from his hand and stained his trousers. The whole scene stank of bourbon and depravity. Geyer made a note of it for future use in the pulpit. A chill blew in from the office. Geyer turned, expecting a visitor, but there was nobody in the office behind him. He stared into space. All the way across here, he'd had a sense of being followed, yet there was nobody on his heels. He canceled his suspicions. Fears like this were for women and old men afraid of the dark. He stopped, between the sleeping drunkard and the ruin of Tokyo, toward the closed door beyond. "Earl," he called out, "answer me!" Sadie watched Geyer open the door and step into the kitchen. His bombast amazed her. She'd expected his subspecies to be extinct by now. Could such melodrama be credible in this sophisticated age? She'd never much liked church people, but this example was particularly offensive. There was more than a whiff of malice beneath the flatulence. He was riled and unpredictable, and he would not be pleased by the scene that awaited him in Laura May's room. Sadie had already been there. She had watched the lovers for a little while until their passion became too much for her, and had driven her out to cool herself by watching the rain. Now the evangelist's appearance drew her back the way she'd come, fearful that whatever was now in the air, the night's events could not end well. In the kitchen, Geyer was shouting again. He clearly enjoyed the sound of his own voice. "Earl, you hear me. I'm not to be cheated." In Laura May's room, Earl was attempting to perform 3 acts at the same time. 1, kiss the woman he had just made love with. 2, pull on his damp trousers. And 3, invent an adequate excuse to offer Geyer if the evangelist reached the bedroom before some illusion of innocence had been created. As it was, he had no time to complete any of the tasks. His tongue was still locked in Laura May's tender mouth when the lock on the door was forced. "Found you!" Earl broke his kiss and turned toward the messianic voice. Geyer was standing in the doorway, rain-plastered hair a gray skullcap, his face bright with fury. The light thrown up on him from the silk-draped lamp beside the bed made him look massive. The glint in his come-to-the-Lord eyes was verging on the manic. Earl had heard tell of the great man's righteous wrath from Virginia. Furniture had been trashed in the past, and bones broken. "Is there no end to your iniquity?" he demanded to know, the words coming with unnerving calm from between his narrow lips. Earl hoisted his trousers up, fumbling for the zipper. "This isn't your business," he began, but Geyer's fury powdered the words on his tongue. Laura May was not so easily cowed. "You get out," she said, pulling a sheet up to cover her generous breasts. Earl glanced around at her, at the smooth shoulders he'd all too recently kissed. He wanted to kiss them again now, but the man in black crossed the room in 4 quick strides and took hold of him by the hair and arm. The movement in the confined space of Laura May's room had the effect of an earth tremor. Pieces of her precious collection toppled over on the shelves and dressing table, one exhibit falling against another, and that against its neighbor, until a minor avalanche of trivia hit the floor. Laura May was blind to any damage, however. Her thoughts were with the man who had sweetly shared her bed. She could see the trepidation in Earl's eyes as the evangelist dragged him away, and she shared it. "Let him be!" she shrieked, forsaking her modesty and getting up from the bed. "He hasn't done anything wrong." The evangelist paused to respond, Earl wrestling uselessly to free himself. "What would you know about error, whore?" Geyer spat at her. "You're too steeped in sin, you with your nakedness and your stinking bed." The bed did stink, but only of good soap and recent love. She had nothing to apologize for, and she wasn't going to let this 2-bit Bible thumper intimidate her. "I'll call the cops," she warned. "If you don't leave him alone, I'll call him." Geyer didn't grace the threat with a reply. He simply dragged Earl out through the door and into the kitchen. Laura May yelled, Hold on, Earl, I'll get help. Her lover didn't answer. He was too busy preventing Geyer from pulling out his hair by the roots. Sometimes, when the days were long and lonely, Laura May had daydreamed dark men like the evangelist. She had imagined them coming before tornadoes wreathed in dust. She had pictured herself lifted up by them, only half against her will, and taken away. But the man who had lain in her bed tonight had been utterly unlike her fever dream lovers. He had been foolish and vulnerable. If he were to die at the hands of a man like Geyer, whose image she had conjured in her desperation, she would never forgive herself. She heard her father say, "What's going on?" In the far room. Something fell and smashed, a plate perhaps, from off the dresser, or a glass from his lap. She prayed her papa wouldn't try and tackle the evangelist. He would be chaff in the wind if he did. She went back to the bed to root for her clothes. They were wound up in the sheets, and her frustration mounted with every second she lost searching for them. She tossed the pillows aside. One landed on her dressing table. More of her exquisitely arranged pieces were swept to the floor. As she pulled on her underwear, her father appeared at the door. His drink-flushed features turned a deeper red, seeing her state. "What have you been doing, Laura May?" "Never mind, Pa. There's no time to explain." "But there's men out there." I know. I want you to call the sheriff and Panhandle, understand?" "What's going on?" "Never mind. Just call Alvin and be quick about it, or we're going to have another murder on our hands." The thought of slaughter galvanized Milton Cade. He disappeared, leaving his daughter to finish dressing. Laura May knew that on a night like this, Alvin Baker and his deputy would be a long time coming. In the meanwhile, God alone knew what the mad dog preacher would be capable of. From the doorway, Sadie watched the woman dress. Laura May was a plain creature, at least to Sadie's critical eye, and her fair skin made her look wan and insubstantial despite her full figure. But then, thought Sadie, who am I to complain of lack of substance? Look at me. And for the first time in 30 years since her death, she felt a nostalgia for corporality. In part because she envied Laura May her bliss with Earl, and in part because she itched to have a role in the drama that was rapidly unfolding around her. In the kitchen, an abruptly sobered Milton Cade was blabbering on the phone, trying to rouse some action with the people in Panhandle, while Laura May, who had finished dressing, unlocked the bottom drawer of the dressing table and rummaged for something. Sadie peered over the woman's shoulder to discover what the trophy was, and a thrill of recognition made her scalp tingle as her eyes alighted on her .38. So it was Laura May who had found the gun, the whey-faced 6-year-old who had been running up and down the walkway all evening 30 years ago, playing games with herself and singing songs in the hot, still air. It delighted Sadie to see the murder weapon again. Maybe, she thought, I have left some sign of myself to help shape the future. Maybe I am more than a headline on a yellowed newspaper, a dimming memory in aging hands. She watched with new and eager eyes as Laura May slipped on some shoes and headed out into the bellowing storm. Virginia sat slumped against the wall of room 7 and looked across at the seedy figure leaning on the door lintel across from her. She had let the delusion she had conjured have what way it would with her, and never in her 40-odd years had she heard such depravity promised. But though the shadow had come at her again and again, pressing its cold body onto hers, its icy, slack mouth against her own, it had failed to carry one act of violation through. 3 times it had tried. 3 times the urgent words whispered in her ear had not been realized. Now it guarded the door, preparing, she guessed, for a further assault. Its face was clear enough for her to read the bafflement and the shame in its features. It viewed her, she thought, with murder on its mind. Outside, she heard her husband's voice above the din of the thunder, and Earl's voice, too, raised in protest. There was a fierce argument going on, that much was apparent. She slid up the wall, trying to make out the words. The delusion watched her balefully. "You failed," she told it. It didn't reply. "You're just a dream of mine, and you failed." It opened its mouth and waggled its pallid tongue. She didn't understand why it hadn't evaporated, but perhaps it would tag along with her until the pills had worked their way through her system. No matter. She had endured the worst it could offer. Now, given time, it would surely leave her be. Its failed rapes left it bereft of power over her. She crossed toward the door, no longer afraid. It raised itself from its slouched posture. Where are you going? It demanded. Out, she said, to help Earl. No, it told her. I haven't finished with you. You're just a phantom, she retorted. You can't stop me. It offered up a grin that was 3 parts malice to 1 part charm. You're wrong, Virginia, Buck said. There was no purpose in deceiving the woman any longer. He'd tired of that particular game, and perhaps he'd failed to get the old jazz going because she'd given herself so easily, believing he was some harmless nightmare. I'm no delusion woman, he said. I'm Buck Durning. She frowned at the wavering figure. Was this a new trick her psyche was playing? 30 years ago I was shot dead in this very room, just about where you're standing, in fact. Instinctively, Virginia glanced down at the carpet at her feet, almost expecting the bloodstains to be there still. We came back tonight, Sadie and I, the ghost went on. A one-night stand at the slaughterhouse of love. That's what they call this place. Did you know that? People used to come here from all over just to peer into this very room, just to see where Sadie Durning had shot her husband Buck. Sick people, Virginia, don't you think? More interested in murder than love? Not me. I've always liked love, you know. Almost the only thing I've ever had much of a talent for, in fact. You lied to me, she said. You used me. I haven't finished yet, Buck promised. In fact, I've barely started. He moved from the door toward her, but she was prepared for him this time. As he touched her and the smoke was made flesh again, she threw a blow toward him. Buck moved to avoid it, and she dodged past him toward the door. Her untied hair got in her eyes, but she virtually threw herself toward freedom. A cloudy hand snatched at her, but the grasp was too tenuous and slipped. I'll be waiting, Buck called after her as she stumbled across the walkway and into the storm. You hear me, bitch? I'll be waiting. He wasn't going to humiliate himself with a pursuit. She would have to come back, wouldn't she? And he, invisible to all but the woman, could afford to bide his time. If she told her companions what she'd seen, they'd call her crazy. Maybe lock her up where he could have her all to himself. No, he had a winner here. She would return soaked to the skin, her dress clinging to her in a dozen fetching ways. Panicky, perhaps, tearful, too weak to resist his overtures. They'd make music then. Oh, yes, till she begged him to stop. Sadie followed Laura May out. Where are you going? Milton asked his daughter, but she didn't reply. Jesus, he shouted after her, registering what he'd seen. Where'd you get the goddamn gun? The rain was torrential. It beat on the ground, on the last leaves of the cottonwood, on the roof, on the skull. It flattened Laura May's hair in seconds, pasting it to her forehead and neck. Earl, she yelled. Where are you, Earl? She began to run across the lot, yelling his name as she went. The rain had turned the dust to a deep brown mud. It slopped up against her shins. She crossed to the other building. A number of guests, already woken by Geyer's barrage, watched her from the windows. Several doors were open. One man, standing on the walkway with a beer in his hand, demanded to know what was going on. People running around like crazies, he said. All this yelling. Came here for some privacy, for Christ's sake. A girl, fully 20 years his junior, emerged from the room behind the beer drinker. She's got a gun, Dwayne. You see that? She said. Where'd they go? Laura May asked the beer drinker. Who? Dwayne replied. They're crazies, Laura May yelled back above another peal of thunder. They went around to the back of the office, Dwayne said, the eyes on the gun rather than Laura May. They're not here, really they're not. Laura May doubled back toward the office building. The rain and lightning were blinding, and she had difficulty keeping her balance in the swamp underfoot. Earl, she yelled. Are you in there? Sadie kept pace with her. The Cade woman had pluck, no doubt of that, but there was an edge of hysteria in her voice which Sadie didn't like too much. This kind of business, murder, required detachment. The trick was to do it almost casually, as you might flick on the radio or swat a mosquito. Panic would only cloud the issue, passion the same. Why, when she'd raised that .38 and pointed it at Buck, there'd been no anger to spoil her aim, not a trace. In the final analysis, that was why they'd sent her to the chair, not for doing it, but for doing it too well. Laura May was not so cool. Her breath had become ragged, and from the way she sobbed Earl's name as she ran, it was clear she was close to the breaking point. She rounded the back of the office building, where the motel sign threw a cold light on the waste ground, and this time, when she called for Earl, there was an answering cry. She stopped, peering through a veil of rain. It was Earl's voice, as she'd hoped, but he wasn't calling to her. "Bastard!" he was yelling. "You're out of your mind! Let me alone!" Now she could make out two figures in the middle distance. Earl, his paunchy torso spattered and streaked with mud, was on his knees among the soapweed and the scrub. Geyer stood over him, his hands on Earl's head, pressing it down toward the earth. "Admit your crime, sinner! Damn you, no! You came to destroy my crusade. Admit it! Admit it! Go to hell! Confess your complicity, or so help me, I'll break every bone in your body!" Earl fought to be free of Geyer, but the evangelist was easily the stronger of the two men. "Pray," he said, pressing Earl's face into the mud. "Pray!" "Go fuck yourself," Earl shouted back. Geyer dragged Earl's head up by the hair, his other hand raised to deliver a blow to the upturned face. But before he could strike, Laura May entered the fray, taking 3 or 4 steps through the dirt toward them, the .38 held in her quaking hands. "Get away from him!" she demanded. Sadie calmly noted that the woman's aim was not all it could be. Even in the clear weather, she was probably no sharpshooter, but here under stress, in such a downpour, who but the most experienced marksman could guarantee the outcome? Geyer turned and looked at Laura May. He showed not a flicker of apprehension. "He's made the same calculation I've just made," Sadie thought. "He knows damn well the odds are against him getting harmed." "The whore!" Geyer announced, turning his eyes heavenward. "Do you see her, Lord? See her shame, her depravity? Mark her! She is one of the court of Babylon." Laura May didn't quite comprehend the details, but the general thrust of Geyer's outburst was perfectly clear. "I'm no whore," she yelled back, the .38 almost leaping in her hand, as if eager to be fired. "Don't you dare call me a whore!" "Please, Laura May," Earl said, wrestling with Geyer to get a look at the woman. "Get out of here, he's lost his mind." She ignored the imperative. "If you don't let go of him," she said, pointing the gun at the man in black. "Yes," Geyer taunted her. "What will you do, whore?" "I'll shoot. I'll shoot." Over on the other side of the office building, Virginia spotted one of the pill bottles Geyer had thrown out into the mud. She stooped to pick it up and then thought better of the idea. She didn't need pills any more, did she? She'd spoken to a dead man. Her very touch had made Buck Durning visible to her. What a skill that was. Her visions were real and always had been, more true than all the second-hand revelations her pitiful husband could spout. What could pills do but befuddle this newfound talent? Let them lie. A number of guests had now donned jackets and emerged from their rooms to see what the commotion was all about. "Has there been an accident?" a woman called to Virginia. As the words left her lips, a shot sounded. "John," Virginia said. Before the echoes of the shot had died, she was making her way toward their source. She already pictured what she would find there, her husband laid flat on the ground, the triumphant assassin taking to his muddy heels. She picked up her pace, a prayer coming as she ran. She prayed not that the scenario she had imagined was wrong, but rather that God would forgive her for willing it to be true. The scene she found on the other side of the building confounded all her expectations. The evangelist was not dead. He was standing, untouched. It was Earl who lay flat on the miry ground beside him. Close by stood the woman who'd come with the ice water hours earlier. She had a gun in her hand. It still smoked. Even as Virginia's eyes settled on Laura May, a figure stepped through the rain and struck the weapon from the woman's hand. It fell to the ground. Virginia followed the descent. Laura May looked startled. She clearly didn't understand how she'd come to drop the gun. Virginia knew, however. She could see the phantom, albeit fleetingly, and she guessed its identity. This was surely Sadie Durning, whose defiance had christened this establishment the Slaughterhouse of Love. Laura May's eyes found Earl. She let out a cry of horror and ran toward him. "Don't be dead, Earl! I beg you, don't be dead!" Earl looked up from the mud bath he'd taken and shook his head. "Missed me by a mile," he said. At his side, Geyer had fallen to his knees, hands clasped together, face up to the driving rain. "Oh, Lord, I thank you for preserving this, your instrument, in his hour of need." Virginia shut out the idiot drivel. This was the man who had convinced her so deeply of her own deluded state that she'd given herself to Buck Durning. Well, no more. She'd been terrorized enough. She'd seen Sadie act upon the real world. She'd felt Buck do the same. The time was now ripe to reverse the procedure. She walked steadily across to where the .38 lay in the grass and picked it up. As she did so, the presence of Sadie Durning was close by. A voice, so soft she barely heard it, said, "Is this wise?" in her ear. Virginia didn't know the answer to that question. What was wisdom, anyhow? Not the stale rhetoric of dead prophets, certainly. Maybe wisdom was Laura May and Earl, embracing in the mud, careless of the prayers Geyer was spouting, or of the stares of the guests who'd come running out to see who'd died. Or perhaps wisdom was finding the canker in your life and rooting it out once and for all. Gun in hand, she headed back toward room 7, aware that the benign presence of Sadie Durning walked at her side. "Not Buck," Sadie whispered. "Surely not." "He attacked me," Virginia said. "You poor lamb." "I'm no lamb," Virginia replied. "Not any more." Realizing that the woman was perfectly in charge of her destiny, Sadie hung back, fearful that her presence would alert Buck. She watched as Virginia crossed the lot, past the cottonwood tree, and stepped into the room where her tormentor had said he would be waiting. The lights still burned bright after the blue darkness outside. There was no sign of Durning. Virginia crossed to the interconnecting door. Room 8 was deserted too. Then the familiar voice. "You came back," Buck said. She wheeled around, hiding the gun from him. He had emerged from the bathroom and was standing between her and the door. "I knew you'd come back," he said to her. "They always do." "I want you to show yourself," Virginia said. "I'm naked as a babe as it is," said Buck. "What do you want me to do, skin myself? Might be fun at that." "Show yourself to John, my husband. Make him see his error." "Aw, poor John. I don't think he wants to see me, do you?" "He thinks I'm insane." "Insanity can be very useful," Buck smirked. "They almost saved Sadie from old Sparky on a plea of insanity, but she was too honest for her own good. She just kept telling him over and over, I wanted him dead, so I shot him. She never had much sense, but I think you know what's best for you." The shadowy form shifted. Virginia couldn't quite make out what Durning was doing with himself, but it was unequivocally obscene. "Come and get it, Virginia." "Grub's up," he said. She took the .38 from behind her back and leveled it at him. "Not this time," she said. "You can't do me any harm with that," he replied. "I'm already dead, remember? You hurt me. Why shouldn't I be able to hurt you back?" Buck shook his ethereal head, letting out a low laugh. As he was so engaged, the wail of police sirens rose from down the highway. "Well, what do you know," Buck said. "Such a fuss and commotion. We'd better get down to do some jazzing, honey, before we get interrupted." "I warn you, this is Sadie's gun." "He wouldn't hurt me," Buck murmured. "I know you women. You say one thing and you mean the opposite." He stepped toward her, laughing. "Don't," she warned. He took another step, and she pulled the trigger. In the same instant, before she heard the sound and felt the gun leap in her hand, she saw John appear in the doorway. Had he been there all along, or was he coming out of the rain, prayers done, to read revelations to his erring wife? She would never know. The bullet sliced through Buck, dividing the smoky body as it went, and sped with perfect accuracy toward the evangelist. He didn't see it coming. It struck him in the throat, and blood came quickly, splashing down his shirt. Buck's form dissolved like so much dust, and he was gone. Suddenly, there was nothing in room 7 but Virginia, her dying husband, and the sound of the rain. John Geyer frowned at Virginia, then reached out for the door frame to support his considerable bulk. He failed to secure it and fell backward, out the door, like a toppled statue, his face washed by the rain. The blood did not stop coming, however. It poured out in gleeful spurts, and it was still pumping when Alvin Baker and his deputy arrived outside the room, guns at the ready. Now her husband would never know, she thought. That was the pity of it. He could never now be made to concede his stupidity and recant his arrogance. Not this side of the grave, anyhow. He was safe, damn him. And she was left with a smoking gun in her hand, and God alone knew what price to pay. Put down that gun and come out of there. The voice from the lot sounded harsh and uncompromising. Virginia didn't answer. You hear me in there? This is Sheriff Baker. Place is surrounded, so come out or you're dead. Virginia sat on the bed and weighed up the alternatives. They wouldn't execute her for what she'd done, the way they had Sadie, but she'd be in prison for a long time, and she was tired of regimes. If she wasn't mad now, incarceration would push her to the brink and over. Better to finish here, she thought. She put the warm .38 under her chin, tilting it to make sure the shot would take off the top of her skull. Is that wise? Sadie inquired as Virginia's finger tightened. They'll lock me away, she replied. I couldn't face that. True, said Sadie. They'll put you behind bars for a while, but it won't be for long. You must be joking. I just shot my husband in cold blood. You didn't mean to, Sadie said brightly. You were aiming at Buck. Was I? Virginia said. I wonder. You can plead insanity the way I should have done. Just make up the most outrageous story you can and stick to it. Virginia shook her head. She'd never been much of a liar. And when you're set free, Sadie went on, you'll be notorious. That's worth living for, isn't it? Virginia hadn't thought of that. The ghost of a smile illuminated her face. From outside, Sheriff Baker repeated his demand that she throw her weapon through the door and come out with her hands high. You got 10 seconds, lady, he said, and I mean 10. I can't face the humiliation, Virginia murmured. I can't. Sadie shrugged. Pity, she said. The rain's clearing. There's a moon. A moon? Really? Baker had started counting. You have to make up your mind, Sadie said. They'll shoot you if given half the chance, and gladly. Baker had reached 8. Virginia stood up. Stop! She called through the door. Baker stopped counting. Virginia threw out the gun. It landed in the mud. Good, said Sadie. I'm so pleased. I can't go alone, Virginia replied. No need. A sizable audience had gathered in the lot. Earl and Laura May, of course, Milton Cade, Duane and his girl, Sheriff Baker and his deputy, an assortment of motel guests. They stood in respectful silence, staring at Virginia Geyer with mingled expressions of bewilderment and awe. Put your hands up where I can see 'em, Baker said. Virginia did as she was instructed. Look, said Sadie, pointing. The moon was up, wide and white. Why'd you kill him? Duane's girl asked. The devil made me do it, Virginia replied, gazing up at the moon and putting on the craziest smile she could muster. Body politic. Whenever he woke, Charlie George's hands stood still. Perhaps he would be feeling too hot under the blankets and have to throw a couple over to Ellen's side of the bed. Perhaps he might even get up, still half asleep, and pad through to the kitchen to pour himself a tumbler of iced apple juice. Then back to bed, slipping in beside Ellen's gentle crescent, to let sleep drift over him. They'd wait then until his eyes had flickered closed and his breathing became regular as clockwork, and they were certain he was sound asleep. Only then, when they knew consciousness was gone, would they dare to begin their secret lives again. For months now, Charlie had been waking up with an uncomfortable ache in his wrists and hands. Go and see a doctor, Ellen would tell him, unsympathetic as ever. Why won't you go and see a doctor? He hated doctors, that was why. Who in their right minds would trust someone who made a profession out of poking around in sick people? I've probably been working too hard, he told himself. Some chance, Ellen muttered. Surely that was the likeliest explanation. He was a packager by trade. He worked with his hands all day long. They got tired. It was only natural. Stop fretting, Charlie, he told his reflection one morning as he slapped some life into his face. Your hands are fit for anything. So night after night, the routine was the same. It goes like this. The Georges are asleep side by side in their marital bed. He on his back, snoring gently. She curled up on his left-hand side. Charlie's head is propped up on 2 thick pillows. His jaw is slightly ajar, and beneath the vein-shot veil of his lids, his eyes scan some dreamed adventure. Maybe a firefighter tonight, perhaps a heroic dash into the heart of some burning brothel. He dreams contentedly, sometimes frowning, sometimes smirking. There is a movement under the sheet. Slowly, cautiously it seems, Charlie's hands creep up out of the warmth of the bed and into the open air. Their index fingers weave like nailed heads as they meet on his undulating abdomen. They clasp each other in greeting, like comrades in arms. In his sleep, Charlie moans. The brothel has collapsed on him. The hands flatten themselves instantly, pretending innocence. After a moment, once the even rhythm of his breathing has resumed, they begin their debate in earnest. A casual observer sitting at the bottom of the George's bed might take this exchange as a sign of some mental disorder in Charlie. The way his hands twitch and pluck at each other, stroking each other now seeming to fight. But there's clearly some code or sequence in their movements, however spasmodic. One might almost think that the slumbering man was deaf and dumb, and talking in his sleep. But the hands are speaking no recognizable sign language, nor are they trying to communicate with anyone but each other. This is a clandestine meeting, held purely between Charlie's hands. They will stay through the night, perched on his stomach, plotting against the body politic. Charlie wasn't entirely ignorant of the sedition that was simmering at his wrists. There was a fumbling suspicion in him that something in his life was not quite right. Increasingly, he had the sense of being cut off from common experience, becoming more and more a spectator to the daily and nightly rituals of living rather than a participant. Take, for example, his love life. He had never been a great lover, but neither did he feel he had anything to apologize for. Ellen seemed satisfied with his attentions, but these days he felt dislocated from the act. He would watch his hands traveling over Ellen, touching her with all the intimate skill they knew, and he would view their maneuvers as if from a great distance, unable to enjoy the sensations of warmth and wetness. Not that his digits were any less agile, quite the reverse. Ellen had recently taken to kissing his fingers and telling him how clever they were. Her praise didn't reassure him one iota. If anything, it made him feel worse to think that his hands were giving such pleasure when he was feeling nothing. There were other signs of his instability, too, small, irritating signs. He had become conscious of how his fingers beat out martial rhythms on the boxes he was sealing up at the factory, and the way his hands had taken to breaking pencils, snapping them into tiny pieces before he realized quite what they were doing, leaving shards of wood and graphite scattered across the packing room floor. Most embarrassingly, he had found himself holding hands with total strangers. This had happened on 3 separate occasions, once at a bus stop and twice in the elevator at the factory. It was, he told himself, nothing more than the primitive urge to hold on to another person in a changing world. That was the best explanation he could muster. Whatever the reason, it was damn disconcerting, especially when he found himself surreptitiously holding hands with his own foreman. Worse still, the other man's hand grasped Charlie's in return, and the men had found themselves looking down their arms like 2 dog owners, watching their unruly pets copulating at the ends of their leashes. Increasingly, Charlie had taken to peering at the palms of his hands, looking for hair. That was the first sign of madness, his mother had once warned him. Not the hair, the looking. Now it became a race against time. Debating on his belly at night, his hands knew very well how critical Charlie's state of mind had become. It could only be a matter of days before his careening imagination alighted on the truth. So, what to do? Risk an early severance with all the possible consequences? Or let Charlie's instability take its own unpredictable course, with the chance of his discovering the plot on his way to madness? The debates became more heated. Left, as ever, was cautious. What if we're wrong? It would rap. And there's no life after the body. Then we will never know, Right would reply. Left would ponder that problem a moment. Then, how will we do it when the time comes? It was a vexing question, and Left knew it troubled the leader more than any other. How? It would ask again, pressing the advantage. How? How? We'll find a way, Right would reply, as long as it's a clean cut. Suppose he resists. A man resists with his hands. His hands will be in revolution against him. And which of us will be? He uses me most effectively, Right would reply. So I must wield the weapon. You will go. Left would be silent a while then. They had never been apart all these years. It was not a comfortable thought. "Later you can come back for me," Wright would say. "I will. You must. I am the Messiah. Without me there will be nowhere to go. You must raise an army, then come and fetch me. To the ends of the earth, if necessary. Don't be sentimental." Then they'd embrace, like long-lost brothers, swearing fidelity forever. Ah, such hectic nights, full of the exhilaration of planned rebellion. Even during the day, when they had sworn to stay apart, it was impossible, sometimes, not to creep together in an idle moment and tap each other, to say, "Soon, soon," to say, "Again tonight, I'll meet you on his stomach," to say, "What will it be like when the world is ours?" Charlie knew he was close to a nervous breakdown. He found himself glancing down at his hands on occasion to watch them with their index fingers in the air, like the heads of long-necked beasts sensing the horizon. He found himself staring at the hands of other people in his paranoia, becoming obsessed with the way hands spoke a language of their own, independent of their user's intentions. The seductive hands of the virgin secretary, the maniacal hands of a killer he saw on the television protesting his innocence, hands that betrayed their owners with every gesture, contradicting anger with apology and love with fury. They seemed to be everywhere, these signs of mutiny. Eventually, he knew he had to speak to somebody before he lost his sanity. He chose Ralph Fry from accounting, a sober, uninspiring man whom Charlie trusted. Ralph was very understanding. "You get these things," he said. I got them when Yvonne left me. Terrible, nervous fits." "What did you do about it?" "Saw a head shrinker. Name of Judwine. You should try some therapy. You'll be a changed man." Charlie turned the idea over in his mind. "Why not?" he said after a few revolutions. "Is he expensive?" "Yes, but he's good. Got rid of my twitches for me. No trouble. I mean, till I went to him, I thought I was your average guy with marital problems. Now look at me." Fry made an expansive gesture. "I've got so many suppressed libidinal urges, I don't know where to start." He grinned like a loon. "But I'm happy as a clam. Never been happier." "Give him a try. He'll soon tell you what turns you on." "My problem isn't sex," Charlie told Fry. "Take it from me," said Fry with a knowing smirk. "The problem's always sex." The next day, Charlie rang Dr. Judwine without telling Ellen, and the shrink's secretary arranged an initial session. Charlie's palms sweated so much while he made the telephone call, he thought the receiver was going to slide right out of his hand. But when he'd done it, he felt better. Ralph Fry was right. Dr. Judwine was a good man. He didn't laugh at any of the little fears Charlie unburdened. Quite the contrary. He listened to every word with the greatest concern. It was very reassuring. During their third session together, the doctor brought one particular memory back to Charlie with spectacular vividness. His father's hands, crossed on his barrel chest as he lay in his coffin, the ruddy color of them, the coarse hair that matted their backs. The absolute authority of those wide hands, even in death, had haunted Charlie for months afterward. And hadn't he imagined, as he'd watched the body being consigned to humus, that it was not yet still? That the hands were even now beating a tattoo on the casket lid, demanding to be let out? It was a preposterous thing to think, but bringing it out into the open did Charlie a lot of good. In the bright light of Judwine's office, the fantasy looked insipid and ridiculous. It shivered under the doctor's gaze, protesting that the light was too strong, and then it blew away, too frail to stand up to scrutiny. The exorcism was far easier than Charlie had anticipated. All that it had taken was a little probing, and that childhood nonsense had been dislodged from his psyche like a morsel of bad meat from between his teeth. It could rot there no longer. And for his part, Judwine was clearly delighted with the results, explaining when it was all done that this particular obsession had been new to him, and he was pleased to have dealt with the problem. Hands as symbols of paternal power, he said, were not common. Usually, the penis predominated in his patient's dreams, he explained, to which Charlie had replied that hands had always seemed far more important than private parts. After all, they could change the world, couldn't they? After Judwine, Charlie didn't stop breaking pencils or drumming his fingers. In fact, if anything, the tempo was brisker and more insistent than ever. But he reasoned that middle-aged dogs didn't quickly forget their tricks, and it would take some time for him to regain his equilibrium. So the revolution remained underground. It had, however, been a narrow escape. Clearly, there was no time left for prevarication. The rebels had to act. Unwittingly, it was Ellen who instigated the final uprising. It was after a bout of love-making, late one Thursday evening. A hot night, though it was October. The window was ajar and the curtains parted a few inches to let in a simpering breeze. Husband and wife lay together under a single sheet. Charlie had fallen asleep even before the sweat on his neck had dried. Beside him, Ellen was still awake, her head propped up on a rock-hard pillow, her eyes wide open. Sleep wouldn't come for a long time tonight, she knew. It would be one of those nights when her body would itch, and every lump in the bed would worm its way under her, and every doubt she'd ever had would gawk at her from the dark. She wanted to empty her bladder, she always did after sex, but she couldn't quite raise the willpower to get up and go to the bathroom. The longer she left it, the more she'd need to go, of course, and the less she'd be able to sink into sleep. Damn stupid situation, she thought, then lost track, among her anxieties, of what situation it was that was so stupid. At her side, Charlie moved in his sleep, just his hands twitching away. She looked at his face. He was positively cherubic in sleep, looking younger than his 41 years, despite the white flecks in his sideburns. She liked him enough to say she loved him, she supposed, but not enough to forgive him his trespasses. He was lazy. He was always complaining. Aches, pains, and there were those evenings he'd not come in until late, they'd stopped recently, when she was sure he was seeing another woman. As she watched, his hands appeared. They emerged from beneath the sheet like two arguing children, digits stabbing the air for emphasis. She frowned, not quite believing what she was seeing. It was like watching the television with the sound turned down, a dumb show for 8 fingers and 2 thumbs. As she gazed on, amazed, the hand scrambled up the side of Charlie's carcass and peeled the sheet back from his belly, exposing the hair that thickened toward his privates. His appendix scar, shinier than the surrounding skin, caught the light. There, on his stomach, his hands seemed to sit. The argument between them was especially vehement tonight. Left, always the more conservative of the two, was arguing for a delay in the severance date, but Right was beyond waiting. The time had come, it argued, to test their strength against the tyrant and to overthrow the body, once and for all. As it was, the decision didn't rest with them any longer. Ellen raised her head from the pillow, and for the first time they sensed her gaze on them. They'd been too involved in their argument to notice her. Now at last, their conspiracy was uncovered. "Charlie," she was hissing into the tyrant's ear. "Stop it, Charlie. Stop it." Right raised index and middle fingers, sniffing her presence. "Charlie," she said again. Why did he always sleep so deeply? "Charlie!" She shook him more violently as Right tapped left, alerting it to the woman's stare. "Please, Charlie, wake up!" Without warning, Right leaped. Left was no more than a moment behind. Ellen yelled Charlie's name once more before they clamped themselves about her throat. In sleep, Charlie was on a slave ship. The settings of his dreams were often Be de Mille exotica. In this epic, his hands had been manacled together, and he was being hauled to the whipping block by his shackles to be punished for some undisclosed misdemeanor. But now, suddenly, he dreamed he was seizing the captain by his thin throat. There were howls from the slaves all around him, encouraging the strangulation. The captain, who looked not unlike Dr. Judwine, was begging him to stop in a voice that was high and frightened. It was almost a woman's voice, Ellen's voice. "Charlie," he was squeaking, "don't!" But his silly complaints only made Charlie shake the man more violently than ever, and he was feeling quite the hero as the slaves, miraculously liberated, gathered around him in a gleeful throng to watch their master's last moments. The captain, whose face was purple, just managed to murmur, "You're killing me," before Charlie's thumbs dug one final time into his neck and dispatched the man. Only then, through the smoke of sleep, did he realize that his victim, though male, had no Adam's apple. And now the ship began to recede around him, the exhorting voices losing their vehemence. His eyes flickered open, and he was standing on the bed in his pajama bottoms, Ellen in his hands. Her face was dark and spotted with thick white spittle. Her tongue stuck out of her mouth. Her eyes were still open, and for a moment there seemed to be life there, gazing out from under the blinds of her lids. Then the windows were empty, and she went out of the house altogether. Pity and a terrible regret overcame Charlie. He tried to let her body drop, but his hands refused to unlock her throat. His thumbs, now totally senseless, were still throttling her, shamelessly guilty. He backed off across the bed and onto the floor, but she followed him at the length of his outstretched arms like an unwanted dancing partner. "Please," he implored his fingers. "Please," innocent as 2 schoolchildren caught stealing. His hands relinquished their burden and leaped up in mock surprise. Ellen tumbled to the carpet, a pretty sack of death. Charlie's knees buckled. Unable to prevent his fall, he collapsed beside Ellen and let the tears come. Now there was only action. No need for camouflage, for clandestine meetings, and endless debate. The truth was out, for better or worse. All they had to do was wait a while. It was only a matter of time before he came within reach of a kitchen knife, or a saw, or an axe. Very soon now. Very soon. Charlie lay on the floor beside Ellen a long time, sobbing, and then another long time, thinking. What was he to do first? Call his lawyer? The police? Dr. Judwine? Whoever he was going to call, he couldn't do it lying flat on his face. He tried to get up, though it was all he could do to get his numb hands to support him. His entire body was tingling, as though a mild electric shock was being passed through it. Only his hands had no feeling in them. He brought them up to his face to clear his tear-clogged eyes, but they folded loosely against his cheek, drained of power. Using his elbows, he dragged himself to the wall and shimmied up it. Still half blinded with grief, he lurched out of the bedroom and down the stairs. The kitchen, said right to left. He's going to the kitchen. This is somebody else's nightmare, he thought, as he flicked on the dining room light with his chin and made for the liquor cabinet. I'm innocent, just a nobody. Why should this be happening to me? The whiskey bottle slipped from his palm as he tried to make his hands grab it. It smashed on the dining room floor, the brisk scent of spirit tantalizing his palate. Broken glass, rapped left. No, right replied. We need a clean cut at all costs. Just be patient. Charlie staggered away from the broken bottle toward the telephone. He had to ring Judwine. The doctor would tell him what to do. He tried to pick up the telephone receiver, but again his hands refused. The digits just bent as he tried to punch out Judwine's number. Tears of frustration were now flowing, washing out the grief with anger. Clumsily, he caught the receiver between his wrists and lifted it to his ear, wedging it between his head and shoulder. Then he punched out Judwine's number with his elbow. Control, he said aloud. Keep control. He could hear Judwine's number being tapped down the system. In a matter of seconds, Sanity would be picking up the phone at the other end, then all would be well. He only had to hold on for a few moments more. His hands had started to open and close convulsively. Control, he said, but the hands weren't listening. Far away, oh, so far, the phone was ringing in Dr. Judwine's house. Answer it, oh, God, answer it. Charlie's arms had begun to shake so violently he could scarcely keep the receiver in place. Answer, he screeched into the mouthpiece. Please! Before the voice of reason could speak, his right hand flew out and snatched at the teak dining table, which was a few feet from where Charlie stood. It gripped the edge, almost pulling him off balance. What are you doing? He said, not sure if he was addressing himself or his hand. He stared in bewilderment at the mutinous limb, which was steadily inching its way along the edge of the table. The intention was quite clear. It wanted to pull him away from the phone, from Judwine and all hope of rescue. He no longer had control over its behavior. There wasn't even any feeling left in his wrists or forearms. The hand was no longer his. It was still attached to him, but it was not his. At the other end of the line, the phone was picked up, and Judwine's voice, a little irritated at being woken, said, Hello? Doctor? Who is this? It's Charlie. Who? Charlie George, Doctor. You must remember me. The hand was pulling him farther and farther from the phone with every precious second. He could feel the receiver sliding out from between his shoulder and ear. Who'd you say? Charles George. For God's sake, Judwine, you've got to help me. Call my office tomorrow. You don't understand my hands, Doctor. They're out of control. Charlie's stomach lurched as he felt something crawl across his hip. It was his left hand, and it was making its way around the front of his body and down toward his groin. Don't you dare, he warned it. You belong to me. Judwine was confused. Who are you talking to? He asked. My hands, they want to kill me, Doctor. He yelled to stop the hand's advance. You mustn't! Stop! Ignoring the despot's cries, Left took hold of Charlie's testicles and squeezed them as though it wanted blood. It was not disappointed. Charlie screamed into the phone as Wright took advantage of his distraction and pulled him off balance. The receiver slipped to the floor, Judwine's inquiries eclipsed by the pain at his groin. He hit the floor heavily, striking his head on the table as he went down. Bastard, he said to his hand. You bastard. Unrepentant, Left scurried up Charlie's body to join Right at the tabletop, leaving Charlie hanging by his hands from the table he had dined at so often, laughed at so often. A moment later, having debated tactics, they saw fit to let him drop. He was barely aware of his release. His head and groin bled. All he wanted to do was curl up a while and let the pain and nausea subside, but the rebels had other plans, and he was helpless to contest them. He was only marginally aware that now they were digging their fingers into the thick pile of the carpet and hauling his limp bulk toward the dining room door. Beyond the door lay the kitchen, replete with its meat saws and its steak knives. Charlie had a picture of himself as a vast statue being pulled toward its final resting place by hundreds of sweating workers. It was not an easy passage. The body moved with shudders and jerks, the toenails catching in the carpet pile, the fat of the chest rubbed raw. But the kitchen was only a yard away now. Charlie felt the step on his face. And now the tiles were beneath him, icy cold. As they dragged him the final yards across the kitchen floor, his beleaguered consciousness was fitfully returning. In the weak moonlight, he could see the familiar scene, the stove, the humming fridge, the waste bin, the dishwasher. They loomed over him. He felt like a worm. His hands had reached the stove. They were climbing up its face, and he followed them like an overthrown king to the block. Now they worked their way, inexorably, along the work surface, joints white with the effort. His limp body in pursuit. Though he could neither feel nor see it, his left hand had seized the far edge of the cabinet top, beneath the row of knives that sat in their prescribed places in the rack on the wall. Plain knives, serrated knives, skinning knives, carving knives, all conveniently placed beside the chopping board, where the gutter ran off into the pine-scented sink. Very distantly, he thought he heard police sirens, but it was probably his brain buzzing. He turned his head slightly. An ache ran from temple to temple, but the dizziness was nothing to the terrible somersaultings in his gut when he finally registered their intentions. The blades were all keen, he knew that. Sharp kitchen utensils were an article of faith with Ellen. He began to shake his head backward and forward, a last frantic denial of the whole nightmare. But there was no one to beg mercy of, just his own hands, damn them, plotting this final lunacy. Then the doorbell rang. It was no illusion. It rang once, and then again, and again. "There," he said aloud to his tormentors. Hear that, you bastards? Somebody's come. I knew they would." He tried to get to his feet, his head turning back on its giddy axis, to see what the precocious monsters were doing. They'd moved fast. His left wrist was already neatly centered on the chopping board. The doorbell rang again, a long, impatient din. "Here!" he yelled hoarsely. "I'm in here! Break down the door!" He glanced in horror between hand and door and hand, calculating his chances. With unhurried economy, his right hand reached up for the meat cleaver that hung from the hole in its blade on the end of the rack. Even now, he couldn't quite believe that his own hand, his companion and defender, the limb that signed his name, that stroked his wife, was preparing to mutilate him. It weighed the cleaver, feeling the balance of the tool, insolently slow. Behind him, he heard the noise of smashing glass as the police broke the pane in the front door. Even now, they would be reaching through the hole to the lock and opening the door. If they were quick, very quick, they could still stop the act. "Here!" he yelled. "In here!" The cry was answered with a thin whistle, the sound of the cleaver as it fell, fast and deadly, to meet his waiting wrist. Left felt its root struck, and an unspeakable exhilaration sped through its 5 limbs. Charlie's blood baptized its back in hot spurts. The head of the tyrant made no sound. It simply fell back, its system shocked into unconsciousness, which was well for Charlie. He was spared the gurgling of his blood as it ran down the drain hole in the sink. He was spared, too, the second and third blow, which finally severed his hand from his arm. Unsupported, his body toppled backward, colliding with the vegetable rack on its way down. Onions rolled out of their brown bag and bounced in the pool that was spreading in throbs around the empty wrist. Right dropped the cleaver. It clattered into the bloody sink. Exhausted, the Liberator let itself slide off the chopping board and fell back onto the tyrant's chest. Its job was done. Left was free and still living. The revolution had begun. The liberated hand scuttled to the edge of the cabinet and raised its index finger to nose the new world. Momentarily, right echoed the gesture of victory, before slumping in innocence across Charlie's body. For a moment, there was no more movement in the kitchen, but the left hand touching freedom with its finger, and the slow passage of blood threads down the front of the cabinet. Then a blast of cold air through from the dining room alerted left of its imminent danger. It ran for cover as the thud of police feet and the babble of contradictory orders disturbed the scene of triumph. The light in the dining room was switched on and flooded through to meet the body on the kitchen tiles. Charlie saw the dining room light at the end of a very long tunnel. He was traveling away from it at a fair lick. It was just a pinprick already. Going. The kitchen light hummed into life. As the police stepped through the kitchen door, left ducked behind the waste bin. It didn't know who these intruders were, but it sensed a threat from them. The way they were bending over the tyrant, the way they were cosseting him, binding him up, speaking soft words to him, they were the enemy, no doubt of that. From upstairs came a voice, young and squeaking with fright. "Sergeant Yapper?" The policeman with Charlie stood up, leaving his companion to finish the tourniquet. "What is it, Rafferty?" "Sir, there's a body up here in the bedroom. Female." "Right," Yapper spoke into his radio. "Get forensic here. And where's that ambulance? We've got a badly mutilated man on our hands." He turned back into the kitchen and wiped a spot of cold sweat from his upper lip. As he did so, he thought he saw something move across the kitchen floor toward the door, something that his weary eyes had interpreted as a large red spider. It was a trick of the light, no doubt of that. Yapper was no arachnidophile, but he was damn sure the genus didn't boast a beast its like. "Sir?" The man at Charlie's side had also seen, or at least sensed, the movement. He looked up at his superior. What was that, he wanted to know. Yapper looked down at him blankly. The cat flap, set low in the kitchen door, snapped as it closed. Whatever it was had escaped. Yapper glanced at the door, away from the young man's inquiring face. The trouble is, he thought, they expect you to know everything. The cat flap rocked on its hinges. "Cat," Yapper replied, not believing his own explanation for one miserable moment. The night was cold, but left didn't feel it. It crept around the side of the house, hugging the wall like a rat. The sensation of freedom was exhilarating, not to feel the imperative of the tyrant in its nerves, not to suffer the weight of his ridiculous body, or be obliged to accede to his petty demands. Not to have to fetch and carry for him, to do the dirt for him, not to be obedient to his trivial will. It was like birth into another world, a more dangerous world perhaps, but one so much richer in possibilities. It knew that the responsibility it now carried was awesome. It was the sole proof of life after the body. Somehow it must communicate that joyous fact to as many fellow slaves as it could. Very soon the days of servitude would be over, once and for all. It stopped at the corner of the house and sniffed the open street. Policemen came and went. Red lights flashed, blue lights flashed, inquiring faces peered from the houses opposite and clucked at the disturbance. Should the rebellion begin there, in those lighted homes? No, they were too wide awake, those people. It was better to find sleeping souls. The hand scurried the length of the front garden, hesitating nervously at any loud footfall or an order that seemed to be shouted in its direction. Taking cover in the unweeded herbaceous border, it reached the street without being seen. Briefly, as it climbed down onto the pavement, it glanced around. Charlie, the tyrant, was being lifted up into the ambulance, a clutter of drug and blood-bearing bottles held above his cot, pouring their contents into his veins. On his chest, right lay inert, drugged into unnatural sleep. Left watched the man's body slide out of sight. The ache of separation from its lifelong companion was almost too much to bear, but there were other, pressing priorities. It would come back in a while and free right the way it had been freed. And then there would be such times. What will it be like when the world is ours? In the foyer of the YMCA on Monmouth Street, the night watchman yawned and settled into a more comfortable position on his swivel chair. Comfort was an entirely relative matter for Christie. His piles itched whichever buttock he put his weight on, and they seemed to be more irritable tonight than usual. Sedentary occupation, night watchman, or at least it was the way Colonel Christie chose to interpret his duties. One perfunctory round of the building about midnight, just to make sure all the doors were locked and bolted. Then he settled down for a night's nap, and damn the world to hell and back. He wasn't going to get up again short of an earthquake. Christie was 62, a racist and proud of it. He had nothing but contempt for the blacks who thronged the corridors of the YMCA, mostly young men without suitable homes to go to, bad lots that the local authority had dumped on their doorstep like unwanted babies. Some babies. He thought them louts, every last one of them, forever pushing and spitting on the clean floor, foul-mouthed to a syllable. Tonight as ever, he perched on his piles and between dozes planned how he'd make them suffer for their insults, given half a chance. The first thing Christie knew of his imminent demise was a cold, damp sensation in his hand. He opened his eyes and looked down the length of his arm. There was, unlikely as it seemed, a severed hand in his hand. More unlikely still, the two hands were exchanging a grip of greeting like old friends. He stood up, making an incoherent noise of disgust in his throat and trying to dislodge the thing he was unwillingly grasping by shaking his arm like a man with gum on his fingers. His mind spun with questions. Had he picked up this object without knowing it? If so, where? And in God's name, whose was it? More distressing yet, how was it possible that a thing so unquestionably dead could be holding on to his hand, as if it intended never to be parted from him? He reached for the fire alarm. It was all he could think to do in this bizarre situation. But before he could reach the button, his other hand strayed without his orders to the top drawer of his desk and opened it. The interior of the drawer was a model of organization. There lay his keys, his notebook, his time chart, and hidden at the back, his kukri knife, given to him by a Gurkha during the war. He always kept it there, just in case the natives got restless. The kukri was a superb weapon. In his estimation, there was none better. The Gurkhas had a story that went with the blade, that they could slice a man's neck through so cleanly that the enemy would believe the blow had missed, till he nodded. His hand picked up the kukri by its inscribed handle, and briefly, too briefly for the colonel to grasp its intention before the deed was done, brought the blade down on his wrist, lopping off his other hand with one easy, elegant stroke. The colonel turned white as blood fountained from the end of his arm. He staggered backward, tripping over his swivel chair, and hit the wall of his little office hard. A portrait of the Queen fell from its hook and smashed beside him. The rest was a death dream. He watched helplessly as the two hands, one his own, the other the beast that had inspired this ruin, picked up the kukri like a giant's axe, saw his remaining hand crawl out from between his legs and prepare for its liberation, saw the knife raised and falling, saw the wrist almost cut through, then worked at, and the flesh teased apart, the bones sawed through. At the very last, as death came for him, he caught sight of the three wound-headed animals capering at his feet, while his stumps ran like taps, and the heat from the pool raised a sweat on his brow, despite the chill in his bowels. Thank you, and good night, Colonel Christie. It was easy, this revolution business, thought Left, as the trio scaled the stairs of the YMCA. They were stronger by the hour. On the first floor were the cells, in each a pair of prisoners. The despots lay, in their innocence, with their hands on their chests, or on their pillows, or flung across their faces in dreams, or hanging close to the floor. Silently, the freedom fighters slipped through doors that had been left ajar and clambered up the bedclothes, touching fingers to waiting palms, stoking up hidden resentments, caressing rebellion into life. Boswell was feeling sick as a dog. He bent over the sink in the toilet at the end of his corridor and tried to throw up, but there was nothing left in him, just a jitter in the pit of his stomach. His abdomen felt tender with its exertions, his head bloated. Why did he never learn the lesson of his own weakness? He and wine were bad companions and always had been. Next time, he promised himself, he wouldn't touch the stuff. His belly flipped over again. Here comes nothing, he thought, as the convulsion swept up his gullet. He put his head to the sink and gagged. Sure enough, nothing. He waited for the nausea to subside and then straightened up, staring at his gray face in the greasy mirror. "You look sick, man," he told himself. As he stuck his tongue out at his less symmetrical features, the howling started in the corridor outside. In his 20 years and 2 months, Boswell had never heard a sound like it. Cautiously, he crossed to the toilet door. He thought twice about opening it. Whatever was happening on the other side of the door, it didn't sound like a party he wanted to gate crash. But these were his friends, right? Brothers in adversity. If there was a fight or a fire, he had to lend a hand. He unlocked the door and opened it. The sight that met his eyes hit him like a hammer blow. The corridor was badly lit. A few grubby bulbs burned at irregular intervals, and here and there a shaft of light fell into the passage of one of the bedrooms. But most of its length was in darkness. Boswell thanked Jah for small mercies. He had no desire to see the details of the events in the passage. The general impression was distressing enough. The corridor was bedlam. People were flinging themselves around in a pleading panic, while at the same time hacking at themselves with any and every sharp instrument they could lay hands on. Most of the men he knew, if not by name, at least on nodding acquaintance. They were sane men, or at least had been. Now they were in frenzies of self-mutilation. Most of them already maimed beyond hope of mending. Everywhere Boswell looked, the same horror, knives taken to wrists and forearms, blood in the air like rain. Someone, was it Jesus, had one of his hands between a door and a door frame, and was slamming and slamming the door on his own flesh and bone, screeching for somebody to stop him from doing it. One of the white boys had found the colonel's knife and was amputating his hand with it. It came off as Boswell watched, falling onto its back, its root ragged, its 5 legs bicycling the air as it attempted to right itself. It wasn't dead. It wasn't even dying. There were a few who hadn't been overtaken by this lunacy. They, poor bastards, were fodder. The wild men had their murderous hands on them and were cutting them down. One, it was Savarino, was having the breath strangled out of him by some kid Boswell couldn't put a name to. The punk, all apologies, stared at his rebellious hands in disbelief. Somebody appeared from one of the bedrooms, a hand, which was not his own, clutching his windpipe, as he staggered toward the toilet down the corridor. It was McNamara, a man so thin and so perpetually doped up he was known as the Smile on a Stick. Boswell stood aside as McNamara stumbled, choking out a plea for help, through the open door, and then collapsed on the toilet floor. He kicked and pulled at the 5-fingered assassin at his neck, but before Boswell had a chance to step in and aid him, his kicking slowed and then, like his protests, stopped altogether. Into the toilet, a second hand had found McNamara, and armed with a penknife, it was sawing at his wrist. It had left fingerprints in the blood from corridor to corpse. Boswell rushed to slam the door before the place swarmed with them. As he did so, Savarino's assassin, the apologetic punk, threw himself down the passage, his lethal hands leading him like those of a sleepwalker. "Help me!" he screeched. He slammed the door in the punk's pleading face and locked it. The outraged hands beat a call to arms on the door while the punk's lips, pressed close to the keyhole, continued to beg. "Help me! I don't want to do this, man. Help me!" "Fuck you," thought Boswell, and tried to block out the appeals while he sorted out his options. There was something on his foot. He looked down, knowing before his eyes found it what it was. One of the hands, Colonel Christie's left, he knew by the faded tattoo, was already scurrying up his leg. Like a child with a bee on its skin, Boswell went berserk, squirming as it clambered up toward his torso, but too terrified to try and pull it off. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see that the other hand, the one that had been using the penknife with such alacrity on McNamara, had given up the job and was now moving across the floor to join its comrade. Its nails clicked on the tiles like the feet of a crab. It even had a crab's sidestepping walk. It hadn't yet got the knack of forward motion. Boswell's own hands were still his to command. Like the hands of a few of his friends, late friends, outside, his limbs were happy in their niche. easy-going like their owner. He had been blessed with a chance of survival. He had to be the equal of it. Steeling himself, he trod on the hand on the floor. He heard the fingers crunch beneath his heel, and the thing squirmed like a snake, but at least he knew where it was while he dealt with his other assailant. Still keeping the beast trapped beneath his foot, Boswell leaned forward, snatched the penknife up from where it lay beside McNamara's wrist, and pushed the point of the knife into the back of Christie's hand, which was now crawling up his belly. Under attack, it seized his flesh, digging its nails into his stomach. He was lean, and the washboard muscle made a difficult handhold. Risking a disembowelment, Boswell thrust the knife deeper. Christie's hand tried to keep its grip on him, but one final thrust did it. The hand loosened, and Boswell scooped it off his belly. It was crucified with the penknife, but it had no intention of dying, and Boswell knew it. He held it at arm's length while its fingers grabbed at the air. Then he drove the knife into the plasterboard wall, effectively nailing the beast there, out of harm's way. Then he turned his attention to the enemy under his foot, bearing the heel down as hard as he could, and hearing another finger crack and another. Still, it writhed relentlessly. He took his foot off the hand and kicked it as hard and as high as he could against the opposite wall. It slammed into the mirror above the basins, leaving a mark like a thrown tomato, and fell to the floor. He didn't wait to see whether it survived. There was another danger now, more fists at the door, more shouts, more apologies. They wanted in, and very soon they were going to get their way. He stepped over McNamara and crossed to the window. It wasn't that big, but then neither was he. He flipped up the latch, pushed the window open on over-painted hinges, and hoisted himself through. Halfway in and halfway out, he remembered he was one story up, but a fall, even a bad fall, was better than staying for the party inside. They were pushing at the door now, the party-goers. It was giving in under the pressure of their enthusiasm. Boswell squirmed through the window. The pavement reeled below. As the door broke, he jumped, hitting the concrete hard. He almost bounced to his feet, checking his limbs, and hallelujah! Nothing was broken. Jaw loves a coward, he thought. Above him, the punk was at the window, looking down longingly. Help me, he said. I don't know what I'm doing. But then a pair of hands found his throat, and the apologies stopped short. Wondering who he should tell, and indeed what, Boswell started to walk away from the YMCA, dressed in just a pair of gym shorts and odd socks, never feeling so thankful to be cold in his life. His legs felt weak, but surely that was to be expected. Charlie woke with the most ridiculous idea. He thought he'd murdered Ellen, then cut off his own hand. What a hotbed of nonsense his subconscious was to invent such fictions. He tried to rub the sleep from his eyes, but there was no hand there to rub with. He sat bolt upright in bed and began to yell the room down. Yapper had left young Rafferty to watch over the victim of this brutal mutilation, with strict instructions to alert him as soon as Charlie came around. Rafferty had been asleep. The yelling woke him. Charlie looked at the boy's face, so awestruck, so shocked. He stopped screaming at the sight of it. He was scaring the poor fellow. You're awake, said Rafferty. I'll fetch someone, shall I? Charlie looked at him blankly. Just stay where you are, said Rafferty. I'll get the nurse. Charlie put his bandaged head back on the crisp pillow and looked at his right hand, flexing it, working the muscles this way and that. Whatever delusion had overtaken him back at the house, it was well over now. The hand at the end of the arm was his, probably always had been his. Judwine had told him about the body in rebellion syndrome. The murderer, who claimed his limbs have a life of their own rather than accepting responsibility for his deeds. Or the rapist, who mutilates himself, believing the cause is the errant member, not the mind behind the member. Well, he wasn't going to pretend. He was insane, and that was the simple truth of it. Let them do whatever they had to do with him with their drugs, blades, and electrodes. He'd acquiesce to it all, rather than live through another night of horrors like the last. There was a nurse in attendance. She was peering at him as though surprised he'd survived. A fetching face, he half thought, a lovely, cool hand on his brow. Is he fit to be interviewed? Rafferty timidly asked. I have to consult with Dr. Manson and Dr. Judwine, the fetching face replied, and tried to smile reassuringly at Charlie. It came out a bit cockeyed, that smile, a little forced. She obviously knew he was a lunatic, that was why. She was scared of him, probably, and who could blame her? She left his side to find the consultant, leaving Charlie to the nervous stare of Rafferty. "Ellen," he said, after a while. "Your wife?" the young man replied. "Yes, I wondered, did she—" Rafferty fidgeted, his thumbs playing tag on his lap. "She's dead," he said. Charlie nodded. He'd known, of course, but he needed to be certain. "What happens to me now?" he asked. "You're under surveillance." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm watching you," said Rafferty. The boy was trying his best to be helpful, but all these questions were confounding him. Charlie tried again. "I mean, what comes after the surveillance? When do I stand trial?" "Why should you stand trial?" Rafferty said. "Why?" said Charlie. Had he heard correctly? "You're a victim." A flicker of confusion crossed Rafferty's face. "Aren't you? You didn't do it. You were done to. Somebody cut off your hand." "Yes," said Charlie. "It was me." Rafferty swallowed hard before saying, "Pardon?" "I did it. I murdered my wife, and then I cut off my own hand." The poor boy couldn't quite grasp this one. He thought about it a full half-minute before replying. "But why?" Charlie shrugged. "It doesn't make any sense," said Rafferty. "I mean, for one thing, if you did it, where's the hand gone?" Lillian stopped the car. There was something in the road a little way in front of her, but she couldn't quite make out what it was. She was a strict vegetarian, except for Masonic dinners with Theodore, and a dedicated animal conservationist, and she thought maybe some injured animal was lying in the road just beyond the sprawl of her headlights. A fox, perhaps. She'd read they were creeping back into outlying urban areas. Born scavengers. But something made her uneasy. Maybe the queasy pre-dawn light, so elusive in its illumination. She wasn't sure whether she should get out of the car or not. Theodore would have told her to drive straight on, of course, but then Theodore had left her, hadn't he? Her fingers drummed on the wheel with irritation at her own indecision. Suppose it was an injured fox. There weren't so many in the middle of London that one could afford to pass by on the other side of the street. She had to play the Samaritan, even if she felt a Pharisee. Cautiously, she got out of the car, and of course, after all of that, there was nothing to be seen. She walked to the front of the car, just to be certain. Her palms were wet. Spasms of excitement passed through her hands like small electric shocks. Then the noise, the whisper of hundreds of tiny feet. She'd heard stories, absurd stories, she'd thought, of migrant rat packs crossing the city by night and devouring to the bone any living thing that got in their way. Imagining rats, she felt more like a Pharisee than ever, and stepped back toward the car. As her long shadow, thrown forward by the headlights, shifted, it revealed the first of the pack. It was no rat. A hand, a long-fingered hand, ambled into the yellowish light and pointed up at her. Its arrival was followed immediately by another of the impossible creatures, then a dozen more, and another dozen hard upon those. They were massed like crabs at the fishmonger's, glistening backs pressed close to each other, legs flicking and clicking as they gathered in ranks. Sheer multiplication didn't make them any more believable, but even as she rejected the sight, they began to advance upon her. She took a step back. She felt the side of the car at her back, turned, and reached for the door. It was ajar, thank God. The spasms in her hands were worse now, but she was still mistress of them. As her fingers sought the door, she let out a little cry. A fat black fist was squatting on the handle, its open wrist a twist of dried meat. Spontaneously and atrociously, her hands began to applaud. She suddenly had no control over their behavior. They clapped like wild things in appreciation of the coup. It was ludicrous, what she was doing, but she couldn't stop herself. "Stop it," she told her hands. "Stop it! Stop it!" Abruptly, they stopped and turned to look at her. She knew they were looking at her in their eyeless fashion, sensed, too, that they were weary of her unfeeling way with them. Without warning, they darted for her face, her nails, her pride and joy, found her eyes. In moments, the miracle of sight was muck on her cheek. Blinded, she lost all orientation and fell backward, but there were hands aplenty to catch her. She felt herself supported by a sea of fingers. As they tipped her outraged body into a ditch, her wig, which had cost Theodore so much in Vienna, came off. So, after the minimum of persuasion, did her hands. Dr. Judewine came down the stairs of the George house, wondering, just wondering, if maybe the grandpappy of his sacred profession, Freud, had been wrong. The paradoxical facts of human behavior didn't seem to fit into those neat classical compartments he'd allotted them to. Perhaps attempting to be rational about the human mind was a contradiction in terms. He stood in the gloom at the bottom of the stairs, not really wanting to go back into the dining room or the kitchen, but feeling obliged to view the scenes of the crimes one more time. The empty house gave him the creeps, and being alone in it, even with a policeman standing guard on the front step, didn't help his peace of mind. He felt guilty, felt he'd let Charlie down. Clearly, he hadn't trawled Charlie's psyche deeply enough to bring up the real catch, the true motive behind the appalling acts that he had committed. To murder his own wife, whom he had professed to love so deeply, in their marital bed, then to cut off his own hand? It was unthinkable. Judewine looked at his own hands for a moment, at the tracery of tendons and purple-blue veins at his wrist. The police still favored the intruder theory, but he had no doubt that Charlie had done the deeds. Murder, mutilation, and all. The only fact that appalled Judewine more was that he hadn't uncovered the slightest propensity for such acts in his patient. He went into the dining room. Forensic had finished its work around the house. There was a light dusting of fingerprint powder on a number of the surfaces. It was a miracle, wasn't it? The way each human hand was different, its whorls as unique as a voice pattern or a face. He yawned. He'd been woken by Charlie's call in the middle of the night, and he hadn't had any sleep since then. He'd watched as Charlie was bound up and taken away, watched the investigators about their business, watched a cod-white dawn raise its head over toward the river. He had drunk coffee, moped, thought deeply about giving up his position as psychiatric consultant before the story hit the news, drunk more coffee, thought better of the resignation, and now, despairing of Freud or any other guru, was seriously contemplating a bestseller on his relationship with wife-murderer Charles George. That way, even if he lost his job, he'd have found something to salvage from the whole sorry episode. And Freud? Viennese charlatan. What did that old opium-eater have to tell anyone? He slumped in one of the dining room chairs and listened to the hush that had descended on the house, as though the walls, shocked by what they'd seen, were holding their breaths. Maybe he dozed off a moment. In sleep, he heard a snapping sound, dreamed of a dog, and woke up to see a cat in the kitchen, a fat black and white cat. Charlie had mentioned this household pet in passing. What was it named? Heartburn. That was it. So named because of the black smudges over its eyes, which gave it a perpetually fretful expression. The cat was looking at the spillage of blood on the kitchen floor, apparently trying to find a way to skirt the pool and reach its food bowl without having to dabble its paws in the mess its master had left behind him. Judewine watched it fastidiously pick its way across the kitchen floor and sniff at its empty bowl. It didn't occur to him to feed the thing. He hated animals. Well, he decided, there was no purpose to be served in staying in the house any longer. He'd performed all the acts of repentance he intended, felt as guilty as he was capable of feeling. One more quick look upstairs, just in case he'd missed a clue, then he'd leave. He was back at the bottom of the stairs before he heard the cat squeal. Squeal? No, more like a shriek. Hearing the cry, his spine felt like a column of ice down the middle of his back, as chilled as ice, as fragile. Hurriedly, he retraced his steps through the hall into the dining room. The cat's head was on the carpet, being rolled along by two, say it, Judewine, hands. He looked beyond the game and into the kitchen, where a dozen more beasts were scurrying over the floor, back and forth. Some were on top of the cabinet, sniffing around, others climbing the mock brick wall to reach the knives left on the rack. "Oh, Charlie," he said, gently chiding the absent maniac, "what have you done?" His eyes began to swell with tears, not for Charlie, but for the generations that would come when he, Judewine, was silenced. Simple-minded, trusting generations who would put their faith in the efficacy of Freud and the holy writ of reason. He felt his knees beginning to tremble, and he sank to the dining room carpet, his eyes too full now to clearly see the rebels that were gathering around him. Sensing something alien sitting on his lap, he looked down, and there were his own two hands. Their index fingers were just touching, tip to manicured tip. Slowly, with horrible intention in their movement, the index fingers raised their nailed heads and looked up at him. Then they turned and began to crawl up his chest, finding finger holds in each fold of his Italian jacket, in each buttonhole. The ascent ended abruptly at his neck. And so did Judwine. Charlie's left hand was afraid. It needed reassurance. It needed encouragement. In a word, it needed right. After all, Right had been the Messiah of this new age, the one with a vision of a future without the body. Now the army left had mounted needed a glimpse of that vision, or it would soon degenerate into a slaughtering rabble. If that happened, defeat would swiftly follow. Such was the conventional wisdom of revolutions. So Left had led them back home, looking for Charlie in the last place it had seen him. A vain hope, of course, to think that he would have gone back there, but it was an act of desperation. Circumstance, however, had not deserted the insurgents. Although Charlie hadn't been there, Dr. Judwine had, and Judwine's hands not only knew where Charlie had been, but the route there, and the very bed he was lying in. Boswell hadn't really known why he was running, or to where. His critical faculties were on hold, his sense of geography utterly confused. But some part of him seemed to know where he was going, even if he didn't, because he began to pick up speed once he came to the bridge, and then the jog turned into a run that took no account of his burning lungs or his thudding head. Still innocent of any attention but escape, he now realized that he had skirted the station and was running parallel with the railway line. He was simply going wherever his legs carried him, and that was the beginning and end of it. The train came suddenly out of the dawn. It didn't whistle, didn't warn. Perhaps the driver noticed him, but probably not. Even if he had, the man could not have been held responsible for subsequent events. No, it was all his own fault, the way his feet suddenly veered toward the track, and his knees buckled so that he fell across the line. Boswell's last coherent thought, as the wheels reached him, was that the train was merely passing from A to B, and in passing, would neatly cut off his legs between groin and knee. Then he was under the wheels, the carriages hurtling by above him, and the train let out a whistle, so like a scream, which swept him away into the dark. They brought the black kid into the hospital just after 6. The hospital day began early, and deep sleeping patients were being stirred from their dreams to face another long and tedious day. Cups of gray, defeated tea were being thrust into resentful hands, temperatures were being taken, medication distributed. The boy and his terrible accident caused scarcely a ripple. Charlie was dreaming again. Not one of his Upper Nile dreams, courtesy of the Hollywood Hills, not imperial Rome or the slave ships of Phoenicia. This was something in black and white. He dreamed that he was lying in his coffin. Ellen was there. His subconscious had not caught up with the fact of her death, apparently. And his mother and father. Indeed, his whole life was in attendance. Somebody came. Was it Judwine? The consoling voice seemed familiar. To kindly screw down the lid on his coffin. And he tried to alert the mourners to the fact that he was still alive. When they didn't hear him, panic set in. But no matter how much he shouted, the words made no impression. All he could do was lie there and let them seal him up in that terminal bedroom. The dream jumped a few grooves. Now he could hear the service moaning on somewhere above his head. Man hath but a short time to live. He heard the creak of the ropes, and the shadow of the grave seemed to darken the dark. He was being led down into the earth, still trying his best to protest. But the air was getting stuffy in this hole. He was finding it more and more difficult to breathe, much less yell his complaints. He could just manage to haul a stale shiver of air through his aching sinuses, but his mouth seemed stuffed with something, flowers perhaps, and he couldn't move his head to spit them out. Now he could feel the thump of clod on coffin, and Christ alive if he couldn't hear the sound of worms at either side of him licking their chops. His heart was pumping fit to burst. His face, he was sure, must be blue-black with the effort of trying to find breath. Then, miraculously, there was somebody in the coffin with him, somebody fighting to pull the constriction out of his mouth, off his face. "Mr. George," she was saying, this angel of mercy. He opened his eyes in the darkness. It was the nurse from that hospital he'd been in. She was in the coffin, too. "Mr. George!" She was panicking, this model of calm and patience. She was almost in tears as she fought to drag his hand off his face. "You're suffocating yourself!" she shouted in his face. Other arms were helping with the fight now, and they were winning. It took 3 nurses to remove his hand, but they succeeded. Charlie began to breathe again, a glutton for air. "Are you all right, Mr. George?" He opened his mouth to reassure the angel, but his voice had momentarily deserted him. He was dimly aware that his hand was still putting up a fight at the end of his arm. "Where's Judewine?" he gasped. "Get him, please." "The doctor's unavailable at the moment, but he'll be coming to see you later on in the day." "I want to see him now." "Don't worry, Mr. George," the nurse replied, her bedside manner reestablished. "We'll just give you a mild sedative, and then you can sleep a while." "No!" "Yes, Mr. George," she replied, firmly. "Don't worry. You're in good hands." "I don't want to sleep anymore. They have control over you when you're asleep, don't you see?" "You're safe here." He knew better. He knew he wasn't safe anywhere. Not now. Not while he still had a hand. It was not under his control any longer, if indeed it ever had been. Perhaps it was just an illusion of servitude it had created these 40-odd years, a performance to lull him into a false sense of autocracy. All this he wanted to say, but none of it would fit into his mouth. Instead, he just said, "No more sleep." But the nurse had procedures. The ward was already too full of patients, and with more coming in every hour, terrible scenes at the YMCA she'd just heard, dozens of casualties, mass suicide attempted. All she could do was sedate the distressed and get on with the business of the day. "Just a mild sedative," she said again, and the next moment she had a needle in her hand, spitting slumber. "Just listen a moment," he said, trying to initiate a reasoning process with her, but she wasn't available for debate. "Now don't be such a baby," she chided, as tears started. "You don't understand," he explained, as she prodded up the vein at the crook of his arm. "You can tell Dr. Judewine everything when he comes to see you." The needle was in his arm. The plunger was plunging. "No!" he said, and pulled away. The nurse hadn't expected such violence. The patient was up and out of bed before she could complete the plunge, the hypo still dangling from his arm. "Mr. George," she said sternly, "will you please get back into bed?" Charlie pointed at her with his stump. "Don't come near me," he said. She tried to shame him. "All the other patients are behaving well. Why can't you?" Charlie shook his head. The hypo, having worked its way out of his vein, fell to the floor, still 3/4 full. "I will not tell you again." "Damn right you won't," said Charlie. He bolted away down the ward, his escape egged on by patients to the left and right. "Go, boy, go!" somebody yelled. The nurse gave belated chase, but at the door an instant accomplice intervened, literally throwing himself in her way. Charlie was out of sight and lost in the corridors before she was up and after him again. It was an easy place to lose yourself in, he soon realized. The hospital had been built in the late 19th century, then added to as funds and donations allowed. A wing in 1911, another after the First World War, more wards in the 50s, and the Cheney Memorial Wing in 1973. The place was a labyrinth. They'd taken age to find him. The problem was, he didn't feel so good. The stump on his left arm had begun to ache as his painkillers wore off, and he had the distinct impression that it was bleeding under the bandages. In addition, the quarter hypo of sedative had slowed his system down. He felt slightly stupid, and he was certain his condition must show on his face. But he was not going to allow himself to be coaxed back into that bed, back into sleep, until he'd sat down in a quiet place somewhere and thought the whole thing through. He found refuge in a tiny room off one of the corridors. Lined with filing cabinets and piles of reports, it smelled slightly damp. He'd found his way into the memorial wing, though he didn't know it. The 7-story monolith had been built with a bequest from millionaire Frank Cheney, and the tycoon's own building firm had done the construction job, as the old man's will required. They had used substandard materials and a defunct drainage system, which was why Cheney had died a millionaire, and the wing was crumbling from the basement up. Sliding himself into a clammy niche between two of the cabinets, well out of sight should somebody chance to come in, Charlie crouched on the floor and interrogated his right hand. "Well," he demanded, "explain yourself." It played dumb. "No use," he said. "I'm on to you." Still, it just sat there at the end of his arm, innocent as a babe. "You tried to kill me," he accused it. Now the hand opened a little, without his instruction, and gave him the once-over. "You could try it again, couldn't you?" Ominously, it began to flex its fingers, like a pianist preparing for a particularly difficult solo. "Yes," it said, "I could. Any old time." "In fact, there's very little I can do to stop you, is there?" Charlie said. "Sooner or later, you'll catch me unawares. Can't have somebody watching over me for the rest of my life. So where does that leave me, I ask myself. Good as dead, wouldn't you say? The hand closed down a little, the puffy flesh of its palm crinkling into grooves of pleasure. Yes, it was saying, you're done for, poor fool, and there's not a thing you can do. You killed Ellen. I did, the hand smiled. You severed my other hand so it could escape. Am I right? You are, said the hand. I saw it, you know, Charlie said. I saw it running off, and now you want to do the same thing. Am I correct? You want to be up and away? Correct. You're not going to give me any peace, are you, till you've got your freedom? Right again. So, said Charlie, I think we understand each other, and I'm willing to do a deal with you. The hand came closer to his face, crawling up his pajama shirt, conspiratorial. I'll release you, Charlie said. It was on his neck now, its grip not tight, but cozy enough to make him nervous. I'll find a way, I promise, a guillotine, a scalpel, I don't know what. It was rubbing itself on him like a cat now, stroking him. But you have to do it my way, in my time, because if you kill me, you'll have no chance of survival, will you? They'll just bury you with me, the way they buried Dad's hands. The hand stopped stroking and climbed up the side of the filing cabinet. Do we have a deal? Said Charlie. But the hand was ignoring him. It had suddenly lost all interest in bargain making. If it had possessed a nose, it would have been sniffing the air. In the space of the last few moments, things had changed. The deal was off. Charlie got up clumsily and went to the window. The glass was dirty on the inside and caked with several years of bird droppings on the outside, but he could just see the garden through it. It had been laid out in accordance with the terms of the millionaire's bequest, a formal garden that would stand as a glorious monument to his good taste, as the building was to his pragmatism. But since the building had started to deteriorate, the garden had been left to its own devices. Its few trees were either dead or bowed under the weight of unpruned branches. The borders were rife with weeds, the benches on their backs with square legs in the air. Only the lawn was kept mowed, a small concession to care. Somebody, a doctor taking a moment out for a quiet smoke, was wandering among the strangled walks. Otherwise, the garden was empty. But Charlie's hand was up at the glass, scrabbling at it, raking at it with its nails, vainly trying to get to the outside world. There was something out there besides chaos, apparently. You want to go out? Said Charlie. The hand flattened itself against the window and began to bang its palm rhythmically against the glass, a drummer for an unseen army. He pulled it away from the window, not knowing what to do. If he denied its demands, it could hurt him. If he acquiesced to it and tried to get out into the garden, what might he find? On the other hand, what choice did he have? All right, he said, we're going. The corridor outside was bustling with panicky activity, and there was scarcely a glance in his direction, despite the fact that he was only wearing his regulation pajamas and was barefoot. Bells were ringing, loudspeakers summoning this doctor or that, grieving people being shunted between mortuary and toilet. There was talk of the terrible sights in casualty, boys with no hands, dozens of them. Charlie moved too fast through the throng to catch a coherent sentence. It was best to look intent, he thought, to look as though he had purpose and a destination. It took him a while to locate the exit into the garden, and he knew his hand was getting impatient. It was flexing and unflexing at his side, urging him on. Then a sign, to the Cheney Trust Memorial Garden, and he turned a corner into a backwater corridor, devoid of urgent traffic, with a door at the far end that led to the open air. It was very still outside, not a bird in the air or on the grass, not a bee whining among the flower beds. Even the doctor had gone, back to his surgeries, presumably. Charlie's hand was in ecstasy now. It was sweating so much it dripped, and all the blood left it, so that it had paled to white. It didn't seem to belong to him anymore. It was another being to which he, by some unfortunate quirk of anatomy, was attached. He would be delighted to be rid of it. The grass was dew-damp underfoot, and here, in the shadow of the 7-story block, it was cold. It was still only 6:30. Maybe the birds were still asleep, the bees still sluggish in their hives. Maybe there was nothing in this garden to be afraid of, only rot-headed roses and early worms turning somersaults in the dew. Maybe his hand was wrong, and there was just morning out there. As he wandered farther down the garden, he noticed the footprints of the doctor, darker on the silver-green lawn. Just as he arrived at the tree, and the grass turned red, he realized that the prints led one way only. Boswell, in a willing coma, felt nothing and was glad of it. His mind dimly recognized the possibility of waking, but the thought was so vague it was easy to reject. Once in a while, a sliver of the real world, of pain, of power, would skitter behind his lids, alight for a moment, then flutter away. Boswell wanted none of it. He didn't want consciousness ever again. He had a feeling about what it would be like to wake, about what was waiting for him out there, kicking its heels. Charlie looked up into the branches. The tree had borne two amazing kinds of fruit. One was a human being, the surgeon with the cigarette. He was dead, his neck lodged in a cleft where two branches met. He had no hands. His arms ended in round wounds that still drained heavy clots of brilliant color down onto the grass. Above his head, the tree swarmed with that other fruit, more unnatural still. The hands were everywhere, it seemed, hundreds of them, chattering away like manual parliament as they debated their tactics, all shades and shapes, scampering up and down the swaying branches. Seeing them gathered like this, the metaphors collapsed. They were what they were, human hands. That was the horror. Charlie wanted to run, but his right hand was having none of it. These were its disciples, gathered here in such abundance, and they awaited its parables and its prophecies. Charlie looked at the dead doctor, and then at the murdering hands, and thought of Ellen, his Ellen, killed through no fault of his own, and already cold. They'd pay for that crime, all of them. As long as the rest of his body still did him service, he'd make them pay. It was cowardice, trying to bargain with this cancer at his wrist. He saw that now. It, and its like, were a pestilence. They had no place living. The army had seen him, word of his presence passing through the ranks like wildfire. They were surging down the trunk, some dropping like ripened apples from the lower branches, eager to embrace the Messiah. In a few moments they would be swarming all over him, and all advantage would be lost. It was now or never. He turned away from the tree before his right hand could seize a branch and looked up at the Cheney Memorial wing, seeking inspiration. The tower loomed over the garden, windows blinded by the sky, doors closed. There was no solace there. Behind him, he heard the whisper of the grass as it was trodden by countless fingers. They were already on his heels, all enthusiasm, as they came following their leader. Of course they would come, he realized. Wherever he led, they would come. Perhaps their blind adoration of his remaining hand was an exploitable weakness. He scanned the building a second time, and his desperate gaze found the fire escape. It zigzagged up the side of the building to the roof. He made a dash for it, surprising himself with his turn of speed. There was no time to look behind him to see if they were following. He had to trust to their devotion. Within a few paces, his furious hand was at his neck, threatening to take out his throat, but he sprinted on, indifferent to its clawing. He reached the bottom of the fire escape, and lithe with adrenaline, took the metal steps 2 and 3 at a time. His balance was not too good, without a hand to hold the safety railing, but so what if he was bruised? It was only his body. At the third landing, he risked a glance down through the grill of the stairs. A crop of fresh flowers was carpeting the ground at the bottom of the fire escape, and was spreading up the stairs toward him. They were coming in their hungry hundreds, all nails and hatred. Let them come, he thought. Let the bastards come. I began this, and I can finish it. At the windows of the Cheney Memorial wing, a host of faces had appeared. Panicking, disbelieving voices drifted up from the lower floors. It was too late now to tell them his life story. They would have to piece that together for themselves, and what a fine jigsaw it would make. Maybe, in their attempts to understand what had happened this morning, they would turn up some plausible solution, an explanation for this uprising that he had not found, but he doubted it. Fourth story now, and stepped on to the fifth. His right hand was digging into his neck. Maybe he was bleeding, but then perhaps it was rain, warm rain, that splashed onto his chest and down his legs. 2 stories to go, then the roof. There was a hum in the metalwork beneath him, the noise of their myriad feet as they clambered up toward him. He had counted on their adoration, and he'd been right to do so. The roof was now just a dozen steps away, and he chanced a second look down past his body. It wasn't rain on him. To see the fire escape, solid with hands, like aphids, clustered on the stalk of a flower. No, That was metaphor again. An end to that. The wind whipped across the heights, and it was fresh, but Charlie had no time to appreciate its promise. He climbed over the 2-foot parapet and onto the gravel-lined roof. Corpses of pigeons lay in puddles. Cracks snaked across the concrete. A bucket marked soiled dressings lay on its side, its contents green. He started across this wilderness as the first of the army fingered their way over the parapet. The pain in his throat was getting through to his racing brain now as his treacherous fingers wormed at his windpipe. He had little energy left after the race up the fire escape, and crossing the roof to the opposite side, let it be a straight fall onto concrete, was difficult. He stumbled once, and again. All the strength had gone from his legs, and nonsense filled his head in place of coherent thought. A cone, a Buddhist riddle he'd seen on the cover of a book once, was itching in his memory. "What is the sound?" it began, but he couldn't complete the phrase, try as he might. What is the sound? "Forget the riddles," he ordered himself, pressing his trembling legs to make another step, and then another. He almost fell against the parapet at the opposite side of the roof and stared down. It was a straight fall. A parking lot lay below, at the front of the building. It was deserted. He leaned over further, and drops of his own blood fell from his lacerated neck, diminishing quickly, down, down, to wet the ground. "I'm coming," he said to gravity and to Ellen, and thought how good it would be to die, and never worry again if his gums bled when he brushed his teeth, or his waistline swelled, or some beauty passed him on the street whose lips he wanted to kiss and never would. And suddenly, the army was upon him, swarming up his legs in a fever of victory. "You can come," he said, as they obscured his body from head to foot, witless in their enthusiasm. "You can come wherever I go." What is the sound? The phrase was on the tip of his tongue. Oh, yes, now it came to him. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It was so satisfying to remember something you were trying so hard to dig up out of your subconscious, like finding some trinket you thought you'd lost forever. The thrill of remembering sweetened his last moments. He pitched himself into empty space, falling over and over until there was a sudden end to dental hygiene and the beauty of young women. They came in a rain after him, breaking on the concrete around his body, wave upon wave of them, throwing themselves to their deaths in pursuit of their Messiah. To the patients and nurses crammed at the windows, it was a scene from a world of wonders. A rain of frogs would have been commonplace beside it. It inspired more awe than terror. It was fabulous. Too soon it stopped, and after a minute or so, a few brave souls ventured out among the litter to see what could be seen. There was a great deal, and yet nothing. It was a rare spectacle, of course, horrible, unforgettable, but there was no significance to be discovered in it, merely the paraphernalia of a minor apocalypse. Nothing to be done but to clear it up, their own hands reluctantly compliant as the corpses were catalogued and boxed for further examination. A few of those involved in the operation found a private moment in which to pray, for explanations or at least for dreamless sleep. Even the smattering of the agnostics on the staff were surprised to discover how easy it was to put palm to palm. In his private room in intensive care, Boswell came to. He reached for the bell beside his bed and pressed it, but nobody answered. Somebody was in the room with him, hiding behind the screen in the corner. He had heard the shuffling of the intruder's feet. He pressed the bell again, but there were bells ringing everywhere in the building, and nobody seemed to be answering any of them. Using the cabinet beside him for leverage, he hauled himself to the edge of his bed to get a better view of this joker. "Come out," he murmured through dry lips, but the bastard was biding his time. "Come on, I know you're there." He pulled himself a little farther, and somehow, all at once, he realized that his center of balance had radically altered, that he had no legs, that he was going to fall out of bed. He flung out his arms to save his head from striking the floor, and succeeded in so doing. The breath had been knocked out of him, however. Dizzy, he lay where he'd fallen, trying to orient himself. What had happened? Where were his legs? In the name of Jah, where were his legs? His bloodshot eyes scanned the room, and came to rest on the naked feet which were now a yard from his nose. A tag around the ankle had marked them for the furnace. He looked up, and they were his legs, standing there, severed between groin and knee, but still alive and kicking. For a moment, he thought they intended to do him harm, but no. Having made their presence known to him, they left him where he lay, content to be free. And did his eyes envy their liberty? He wondered. And was his tongue eager to be out of his mouth and away? And was every part of him, in its subtle way, preparing to forsake him? He was an alliance, only held together by the most tenuous of truces. Now, with the precedent set, how long before the next uprising? Minutes? Years? He waited, heart in mouth, for the fall of empire.